The Book of Jubilees contains some of the most detailed and terrifying prophecies ever written. Prophecies that scholars claim are already beginning to unfold before our eyes. Today, we're diving into the complete story of Jubilees' final prophecies, from the cosmic signs that will herald the end times to the ultimate fate of humanity itself. In the next hours, we're going to walk through every single prophecy contained in this mysterious text, from the first warning signs to the final judgment. You'll discover why biblical scholars have called these the most complete end times prophecies ever recorded, and why some believe we're already seeing them come to pass in our modern world. But before we get started, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We'd love to hear from you. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we? The book that tried to outpredict time. Picture an ancient scroll hidden for centuries beneath the desert sands. Its pages contain something extraordinary, a complete map of time itself. Every moment that has ever been, every breath that will ever be taken, every rise and fall of nations, all written down before the world began. The Book of Jubilees carries this bold claim. More than a religious text, it stands as humanity's most ambitious attempt to solve the puzzle of existence. When people felt lost in the chaos of their world, this book promised answers. When empires crushed the innocent and the wicked seemed to prosper, Jubilees whispered, "Wait, there is a plan." At first glance, it may seem like another ancient prophecy, but beneath its surface lies something far more fascinating. A window into minds that refused to accept that history was random. These were people who needed time to make sense. They needed the future to hold justice. They needed God to keep perfect records. The authors of Jubilees didn't simply predict the end of the world. They redesigned time itself, breaking it into neat, manageable pieces. They created a cosmic calendar where every sin had its season, every empire its expiration date. Beyond mere prophecy, they crafted a theology of hope disguised as inevitable fate. This book never made it into the Bible, most people know. Church councils rejected it, rabbis set it aside. Yet for over 2,000 years, it has whispered its secrets to those who found it. Ethiopian Christians preserved it as sacred scripture. Desert monks copied it by candlelight. Modern scholars unearth its fragments from ancient caves, still trying to understand why it mattered so much to people facing the end of their world. The story of Jubilees begins with a simple human need, the need to believe that suffering has meaning. When foreign armies march through your streets, when your temple lies in ruins, when everything sacred seems under attack, you either despair or you find a way to make it all part of a larger story. Jubilees chose the larger story. It took the familiar tales of Genesis and Exodus and rewrote them as a guidebook for reading history's hidden patterns. Every patriarch became a prophet. Every ancient event became a preview of things to come. The past became a mirror that reflected the future. The book emerged from one of the most turbulent periods in Jewish history. Greek culture flooded the ancient world, challenging old ways of thinking. Kings demanded loyalty to foreign gods. Young people abandoned their ancestors' customs. Traditional leaders compromised with power. To many, it felt like the end of everything. But Jubilees saw deeper currents beneath the surface chaos. Where others saw random violence, it detected divine mathematics. Where others mourned broken traditions, it glimpsed cosmic restoration. The book promised that time itself was on the side of justice. Every wound would heal, every wrong would be righted, every tear would be wiped away. Yet this wasn't passive comfort. Jubilees demanded something from its readers. It required them to see their present moment as part of an ancient pattern. Their struggles weren't unique. They were the latest chapter in a story that began before creation. Their choices mattered not just for themselves, but for the completion of time's great arc. The book's authors understood something profound about human psychology. People need stories that explain why they suffer. They need frameworks that transform chaos into meaning. They need assurance that their pain serves a purpose larger than their individual experience. Jubilees provided all three. More than prediction, it offered participation. Readers weren't passive victims waiting for rescue. They were characters in a drama whose ending had already been written in their favor. This knowledge changed everything. It transformed despair into patience, rage into resolve, confusion into quiet confidence. The scroll that contains these promises has traveled through centuries, hidden in caves, smuggled across borders, translated into forgotten languages. Each generation that found it faced the same question: can time really be mapped? Can the future truly be known? Can suffering really serve a greater good? Tonight, we follow that ancient scroll through its long journey from crisis to comfort, from prophecy to hope. We explore how desperate people created a book that tried to outpredict time itself and why their vision still haunts us today. What is the Book of Jubilees? Imagine Moses climbing Mount Sinai, not once, but twice. The first time he receives the stone tablets, but the second time, the time Scripture doesn't mention, he receives something far more extraordinary. An angel sits beside him and begins to dictate. For 40 days and 40 nights, the heavenly messenger reveals the complete story of time, from the world's first breath to its final sigh. This is how Jubilees introduces itself. The book claims to be that secret revelation, the hidden knowledge passed from angel to prophet to human hearts ready to receive it. More than creative fiction, this framing served a specific purpose. In the ancient world, new ideas needed old authority. Bold claims required ancient credentials. Jubilees takes the familiar stories of Genesis and Exodus and expands them into something unprecedented. Where the Torah gives genealogies, Jubilees provides exact dates. Where Scripture mentions events, Jubilees explains their cosmic significance. Where the Bible offers history, Jubilees reveals destiny. The book divides all of time into neat packages called Jubilees, periods of 49 years each. Within each Jubilee lies 7 weeks of 7 years. This mathematical precision wasn't decoration, it was theology. The authors believed that time itself followed divine patterns, that history unfolded according to heavenly mathematics. At first glance, it may seem like an ancient calendar, but Jubilees carries the weight of something far deeper. Each dated event becomes a piece in a vast puzzle. Adam's creation, Noah's flood, Abraham's covenant, Israel's exodus, all fit together to reveal time's hidden architecture. The book's structure mirrors its message. Just as time moves in ordered cycles, the narrative moves through carefully planned stages. Creation leads to corruption. Corruption triggers judgment. Judgment opens space for renewal. Renewal sets the stage for the next cycle. This pattern repeats throughout history, each repetition bringing the world closer to its final transformation. Beyond mere retelling, Jubilees functions as an instruction manual for reading Providence. It teaches readers to see their own experiences as part of ancient patterns. Their suffering echoes Noah's generation. Their persecution mirrors Abraham's trials. Their hope reflects Moses' vision of the Promised Land. The book emerged from communities that felt displaced in time. Foreign rulers controlled their land. Strange customs invaded their culture. Young people abandoned old ways. Traditional sources of authority seemed powerless against change. In response, Jubilees offered a different kind of authority, the authority of heaven's own records. This heavenly authority manifests through constant references to celestial tablets. The angel tells Moses that everything being revealed was already written in the heavenly tablets. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously in heaven's library. Human history simply unfolds what was already recorded before time began. Such claims served multiple purposes. They elevated the book's status above human opinion. They provided comfort to people who felt forgotten by God. They suggested that current suffering was temporary, while divine justice was eternal. Most importantly, they transformed readers from passive victims into informed participants in cosmic drama. The book's language reflects its cosmic ambitions. Simple events become loaded with meaning. Dates become destiny. Genealogies become prophecy. Even seemingly minor details, what someone ate, whom they married, where they traveled, carry theological weight. Nothing happens by accident. Everything serves the larger plan. Jubilees also functions as a bridge between different types of ancient literature. It combines the narrative style of Genesis with the legal precision of Leviticus. It blends historical chronicles with prophetic visions. It merges priestly concerns about purity with apocalyptic dreams of transformation. This hybrid nature reflects the complex needs of communities caught between traditional and revolutionary ways of thinking. The book's authors understood that people need both continuity and change. They provided continuity by retelling familiar stories. They provided change by revealing hidden meanings within those stories. Readers could feel connected to their ancestors while also feeling called to new ways of understanding their world. More than historical record, Jubilees serves as theological argument. It contends that time has purpose, that suffering has limits, that justice has a schedule. These weren't abstract philosophical claims. They were practical tools for spiritual survival in an age when traditional frameworks seemed inadequate. The book's influence extends far beyond its original context. Early Christians quoted it, medieval scholars studied it, modern archaeologists uncover its fragments. Ethiopian churches still read it as scripture. Each generation finds something different in its pages, but the core appeal remains constant: the promise that chaos is actually order in disguise. A crisis of time, the world that gave birth to Jubilees. Picture Jerusalem in the 2nd century before Christ. Greek soldiers patrol the temple courts. Young priests speak more Greek than Hebrew. Traditional festivals compete with athletic games honoring foreign gods. Elderly scholars watch their life's work crumble as their own children embrace alien customs. This wasn't merely cultural change. To many Jews, it felt like the end of the world. Their covenant with God seemed broken. Their sacred calendar was being replaced. Their ancient laws were being forgotten. Time itself appeared to be slipping away from divine control. The crisis began decades earlier when Alexander the Great's empire fragmented into competing kingdoms. The Seleucid dynasty gained control over Jewish lands, bringing with them Greek culture, philosophy, and religion. At first, many Jews welcomed these influences. Greek learning offered new ways of thinking. Greek commerce brought prosperity. Greek customs seemed sophisticated and modern. But prosperity came with a price. Traditional boundaries began to blur. Intermarriage increased. Sacred festivals were neglected. Young people questioned old authorities. The temple's influence weakened as secular Greek institutions gained power. What had begun as cultural enrichment was becoming cultural replacement. The crisis deepened under Antiochus Epiphanes, a Seleucid king who demanded religious conformity throughout his realm. He outlawed Jewish practices, desecrated the temple, and forced Jews to participate in Greek religious ceremonies. Traditional Judaism wasn't just discouraged, it became illegal. These pressures created deep divisions within Jewish society. Some leaders counseled accommodation. They argued that Jews could maintain their core beliefs while adapting their external practices. Other voices demanded resistance. They insisted that compromise with Greek culture meant abandoning the covenant with God. Beyond political oppression lay a deeper crisis, a crisis of meaning. The traditional Jewish understanding of history emphasized divine protection for the faithful. God had rescued the Israelites from Egypt, given them the promised land, and established them as a chosen people. Yet now they found themselves oppressed again, their faith under attack, their future uncertain. This crisis demanded new ways of understanding time and providence. Traditional answers seemed inadequate. If God controlled history, why were the wicked prospering while the faithful suffered? If the covenant was eternal, why did it seem so fragile? If Israel was chosen, why did their chosenness feel more like curse than blessing? Jubilees emerged from this cauldron of doubt and desperation. The book offered a radically different way of reading current events. Present sufferings weren't signs of divine abandonment. They were necessary stages in a predetermined plan. Foreign oppression wasn't evidence of God's weakness. It was part of heaven's strategy for ultimate victory. The book's authors had clearly witnessed the temple's defilement. They had seen traditional practices abandoned. They had watched young people drift away from ancestral faith. But instead of despairing, they interpreted these developments as confirmation of ancient prophecies. The end was coming, not as defeat, but as prelude to restoration. This perspective required sophisticated theological innovation. The authors had to explain why a good God would allow such extensive suffering among the faithful. They had to reconcile divine justice with apparent injustice. They had to provide hope without denying the reality of present pain. Jubilees solved these problems through its unique understanding of time. History wasn't random. It followed precise patterns established before creation. Current crises weren't accidents. They were scheduled events in heaven's calendar. Suffering wasn't meaningless, it served specific purposes in the larger plan of restoration. The book's calendar theology proved especially relevant to contemporary debates. Different Jewish groups used different calendars, leading to conflicts over when to observe festivals and perform temple rituals. Greeks introduced their own calendars and festivals. Time itself had become contested territory. Jubilees responded by claiming that there was only one true calendar, the solar calendar of 364 days that heaven itself followed. All other calendars were corruptions introduced by fallen angels and adopted by deceived humans. Proper timekeeping wasn't just practical, it was spiritual. Getting the calendar right meant aligning with heaven's own rhythm. This calendar controversy reflects the book's broader strategy for dealing with cultural crisis. Instead of engaging contemporary debates on their own terms, Jubilees relocated those debates to cosmic ground. The question wasn't whether Greek culture was good or bad for Jews, it was whether humans would follow heaven's patterns or hell's deceptions. Such reframing transformed the nature of resistance. Faithful Jews weren't simply defending tradition against innovation. They were participating in cosmic warfare between order and chaos. Their fidelity to ancient practices wasn't backwards-looking nostalgia, it was prophetic preparation for the coming kingdom. The book's vision attracted communities that felt overwhelmed by the pace of change. These weren't necessarily the most disadvantaged Jews. Many appear to have been educated, affluent, and influential. But they shared a sense that something essential was being lost in the rush toward modernization. Unearthed at Qumran, Jubilees and the Dead Sea Scrolls. The story takes a dramatic turn in 1947 when a young Bedouin shepherd throws a stone into a cave near the Dead Sea. The sound he hears changes everything, not the hollow echo of empty space, but the sharp crack of breaking pottery. Inside those jars, wrapped in ancient linen, lie manuscripts that have waited nearly 2,000 years to tell their secrets. Among those scrolls, archaeologists discover something remarkable: multiple copies of the Book of Jubilees. Not just fragments, but substantial portions of the text. Even more striking, they find these copies alongside other sacred writings, biblical books, psalms, prayers, and community rules. Whoever preserved these manuscripts considered Jubilees important enough to copy, store, and protect. The community that lived at Qumran appears to have been a group of religious separatists, possibly connected to the Essenes mentioned in ancient sources. They had withdrawn from mainstream Jewish society, establishing a desert settlement dedicated to strict religious observance. They saw themselves as the true remnant of Israel, faithful to God's covenant while the rest of the nation had gone astray. For these desert dwellers, Jubilees wasn't just another interesting book. It was a key to understanding their own identity and purpose. The book's emphasis on ritual purity aligned with their obsessive attention to cleanliness laws. Its condemnation of religious compromise resonated with their decision to separate from corrupted temple worship. Its promise of coming judgment validated their conviction that mainstream Judaism had lost its way. The Qumran community's library reveals their theological priorities. Alongside biblical texts, they preserved works that emphasize divine foreknowledge, predetermined history, and the coming transformation of the world. Jubilees fit perfectly into this collection. Its detailed chronology provided a roadmap for understanding how their present moment connected to past events and future hopes. Beyond mere compatibility, Jubilees seems to have shaped the community's actual practices. Archaeological evidence suggests the Qumran sect followed a solar calendar, very similar to the one promoted in Jubilees. Their festival dates, ritual schedules, and community organization all reflect the book's calendar theology. They weren't just reading about heaven's timekeeping, they were trying to live according to its rhythms. The community rule texts found at Qumran echo many themes from Jubilees. Both emphasize the importance of proper calendar observance. Both condemn mixing with the ritually impure. Both envision a coming time when the wicked will be punished and the righteous vindicated. Both present themselves as preserving authentic traditions while others have been deceived. This convergence suggests that Jubilees wasn't created in isolation. It emerged from a broader movement within Second Temple Judaism that emphasized purity, separation, and apocalyptic expectation. The Qumran community represents one expression of this movement, but similar groups likely existed throughout the Jewish world. The desert location of Qumran reflects the theological geography promoted in Jubilees. The book repeatedly emphasizes that true revelation comes away from the corruption of cities and crowds. Moses receives the law on a mountain. Abraham encounters God in the wilderness. Noah finds salvation through separation from the wicked world. The Qumran community embodied this principle by establishing their settlement in the desert, away from the compromised temple and contaminated cities. Their copying practices reveal the care with which they transmitted Jubilees. The manuscript fragments show evidence of multiple generations of scribes working to preserve the text. They corrected errors, standardized spellings, and maintained consistent formatting. This wasn't casual preservation, it was devoted stewardship of what they considered sacred literature. The community's interpretation of Jubilees appears in their other writings. They quote its chronological systems when discussing biblical events. They reference its calendar when establishing their own festival dates. They echo its language when describing their enemies and their hopes. The book had become part of their theological DNA. Yet the Qumran community eventually disappeared, their settlement abandoned sometime during the 1st century of the Common Era. Whether destroyed by Roman armies, disbanded due to internal conflicts, or simply faded away as members died or departed, the community that treasured Jubilees could no longer sustain itself. But they had performed a crucial service. They had preserved the book for future generations to discover and study. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal something important about how Jubilees functioned in ancient communities. This wasn't armchair theology for individual readers. It was communal literature that shaped group identity, regulated collective behavior, and provided a shared framework for understanding the world. The book succeeded not just as intellectual achievement, but as practical guidance for communities seeking to live faithfully in turbulent times. When archaeologists first examined the Jubilees fragments from Qumran, they realized they were seeing the book as its original communities had known it. Earlier scholars had only encountered later translations and adaptations. Now they could study the Hebrew original, observe how it was copied and preserved, and understand how it fit into the broader literary culture of Second Temple Judaism. The Qumran discovery transformed modern understanding of Jubilees from an obscure ancient curiosity into a window into the religious creativity of early Judaism. The book's influence hadn't ended with its exclusion from the biblical canon. It had continued to shape communities and individuals who found in its pages the keys to understanding their place in God's cosmic plan. Moses, the angels, and the heavenly archive. Close your eyes and imagine the scene that Jubilees paints for us. Moses stands alone on Mount Sinai's peak, the stone tablets already received and broken, now replaced with new ones. But something else is happening, something Scripture never mentioned. A figure of pure light approaches through the thin mountain air. This is the angel of the presence, keeper of heaven's deepest secrets. The angel carries with him the greatest treasure in existence, the heavenly tablets where all of history is recorded. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously on these celestial pages. Every breath ever taken, every choice ever made, every moment yet to come, all written in heaven's permanent ink before the world began. This scene establishes the core claim of Jubilees. Nothing you are about to read comes from human imagination. Every word was dictated by divine messenger to humanity's greatest prophet. The book presents itself not as creative interpretation, but as revealed truth, not as human reflection, but as heavenly disclosure. Such claims served crucial purposes in the ancient world. New ideas required ancient authority. Revolutionary concepts needed traditional credentials. Communities facing crisis needed assurance that their understanding of events aligned with divine perspective. By placing its revelations in Moses' mouth and heaven's archive, Jubilees transformed controversial theology into unquestionable revelation. The angel's role goes beyond mere messenger. He serves as heaven's librarian, the keeper of cosmic records. In his custody rest the tablets where divine decrees are recorded, where human destinies are written, where the schedule of ages is preserved. This figure bridges the gap between heaven's perfect knowledge and earth's confused experience. Ancient readers would have recognized this motif. Heavenly books appear throughout Jewish and Christian apocalyptic literature. The Book of Life records the names of the righteous. Daniel speaks of books being opened for divine judgment. Revelation describes scrolls sealed with seven seals. Jubilees participates in this broader tradition while developing its own unique emphasis on chronological precision. The heavenly tablets serve multiple theological functions. They establish that history follows divine plan rather than random chance. They assure readers that present suffering serves ultimate purposes. They promise that divine justice operates according to perfect schedule, even when human experience suggests otherwise. They transform time itself from neutral medium into sacred revelation. Moses functions as more than passive recipient of this revelation. The text presents him as actively engaging with the angelic messenger, asking questions, seeking clarification, and ensuring accurate transmission to future generations. This portrayal elevates Moses' role from lawgiver to cosmic interpreter, from national leader to universal prophet. The mountain setting reinforces the revelation's authenticity. Throughout Scripture, mountains serve as places where heaven and earth intersect. Moses receives the Ten Commandments on Sinai. Elijah encounters God on Horeb. Jesus is transfigured on Tabor. By locating its revelations on the same mountain where Moses received the Torah, Jubilees claims equal authority with Scripture itself. The 40-day time frame creates additional parallels with biblical revelation. Moses spent 40 days on the mountain receiving the law. Elijah traveled 40 days to reach Horeb. Jesus fasted 40 days in the wilderness. This pattern suggests that true revelation requires extended separation from ordinary human experience. Beyond establishing authority, the heavenly archive concept addresses specific theological problems that troubled Second Temple communities. If God is all-knowing, why does evil seem to prosper? If divine justice is certain, why does it seem delayed? The heavenly tablets provide answers. Everything unfolds according to predetermined schedule, recorded in advance in heaven's perfect records. The angel's revelation method reflects ancient scribal practices. Professional scribes worked by dictation, one person speaking while another wrote. By presenting the book as angelic dictation to Moses, Jubilees claims that its human authors functioned as divine scribes, accurately recording heavenly communication rather than creating human speculation. This scribal imagery had practical implications for how communities understood their relationship to the text. Reading Jubilees wasn't merely studying human ideas about divine matters. It was accessing heaven's own perspective on earthly events. Teaching from Jubilees wasn't sharing personal interpretations. It was transmitting revealed truth. The heavenly tablets also function as a kind of cosmic constitution, establishing the fundamental laws that govern historical development. Just as human societies operate according to legal codes, the universe operates according to divine decrees recorded in heaven's archive. Understanding these decrees enables readers to interpret current events and anticipate future developments. Yet the book maintains a crucial distinction between divine foreknowledge and human freedom. The tablets record what will happen, but human choices remain real and consequential. People can align themselves with heaven's plan or rebel against it, but they cannot change its ultimate trajectory. This balance preserves both divine sovereignty and human responsibility. The angel's role as revealer creates a chain of authority from heaven to earth. God establishes the decrees. The angel of the presence records them on heavenly tablets. Moses receives the revelation on the mountain. Human teachers transmit it to communities. Faithful individuals align their lives with its guidance. This chain ensures that heaven's perspective reaches earthly experience. Time as sacred weapon. The calendar controversy. Picture two groups of faithful Jews standing in the same city on the same day, yet celebrating completely different festivals. One group observes Passover according to their ancient traditions. The other group insists that Passover won't arrive for several more days. Both claim to follow God's commandments. Both accuse the other of serious error. The calendar has become a battlefield. This wasn't merely scheduling confusion, it was theological warfare. In the Second Temple period, competing Jewish groups followed different calendar systems, creating conflicts over when to observe holy days, when to offer sacrifices, and when to celebrate festivals. Time itself had become contested territory. Jubilees entered this controversy with absolute conviction. The book declares that heaven follows a solar calendar of exactly 364 days, 52 weeks of 7 days each. This perfect mathematical symmetry reflects divine order. Every date falls on the same day of the week each year. Spring festivals always begin on Wednesday. Autumn celebrations always start on Tuesday. Heaven's schedule never varies. The book traces this calendar system back to creation itself. When God divided light from darkness, establishing day and night, the divine intention was to create a perfectly ordered system of 364 days. The sun, moon, and stars were placed in the sky not just to provide light, but to mark this sacred calendar. Any deviation from this system represents corruption of God's original design. Jubilees reserves its harshest criticism for those who follow lunar calendars. The book claims that fallen angels, the watchers who corrupted humanity before the flood, introduced lunar calculations to deceive people about proper timing. Following the moon's phases rather than the sun's course means aligning with demonic deception rather than divine truth. This calendar theology served practical purposes for the book's original communities. Groups that felt marginalized by mainstream Jewish leadership could claim that their opponents weren't just wrong about politics or interpretation, they were wrong about time itself. Every missed festival, every incorrectly dated holy day, every scheduling conflict became evidence of their rivals' fundamental spiritual error. The solar calendar also provided psychological comfort for communities facing persecution. When foreign rulers disrupted traditional festival observances, faithful Jews following the Jubilees calendar could maintain that true worship continued according to heaven's schedule, regardless of earthly interference. External oppression couldn't corrupt time itself. Beyond practical benefits, the calendar controversy reflects deeper theological divisions within Second Temple Judaism. Traditional temple leadership followed calendars that required complex calculations and occasional adjustments. These systems demanded expertise, creating dependencies on scholarly authorities. The Jubilees calendar, with its perfect mathematical symmetry, could be understood and followed by anyone capable of basic counting. This democratization of timekeeping had revolutionary implications. Communities following the Jubilees calendar didn't need professional priests to determine festival dates. They didn't need complex astronomical calculations or scholarly interpretation. Heaven's schedule was accessible to anyone willing to count days and weeks according to divine mathematics. The book presents calendar observance as a test of spiritual loyalty. Those who follow heaven's true calendar demonstrate their faithfulness to divine order. Those who adopt corrupted systems reveal their allegiance to the forces of chaos and deception. Timekeeping becomes a form of religious profession, a public declaration of theological commitment. Jubilees connects proper calendar observance to broader themes of purity and separation. Just as faithful communities must separate themselves from ritually impure foods, practices, and people, they must also separate themselves from temporally impure calendar systems. Mixing with those who follow false calendars contaminates the faithful, just as mixing with other forms of impurity does. The book's chronological precision serves apologetic purposes. By providing exact dates for biblical events, Jubilees demonstrates that its calendar system can organize all of history coherently. Adam was created on Friday, the 1st of Nisan. Noah entered the ark on Sunday, the 17th of the second month. Abraham was called on the 1st of the third month. These precise dates prove the calendar's divine origin and cosmic scope. Calendar theology also addresses eschatological concerns. Jubilees teaches that the end times will arrive according to precise schedule, measured by heaven's perfect calendar. Those who follow corrupted timekeeping systems will miss the signs of the approaching end. Only those aligned with heaven's calendar will recognize when final events begin to unfold. The book's insistence on calendar purity reflects broader anxieties about cultural assimilation. As Jewish communities encountered Greek, Persian, and Roman calendar systems, some began adopting foreign practices for practical reasons. Jubilees warns that such accommodations aren't neutral. They represent fundamental betrayals of covenant faithfulness. Yet the calendar controversy reveals something profound about human nature. People need shared rhythms to maintain community identity. When groups can't agree on basic scheduling, deeper relationships become difficult to sustain. The calendar wasn't just about time, it was about belonging, identity, and mutual recognition of sacred authority. The archaeological evidence from Qumran suggests that some Jewish communities did attempt to live according to the Jubilees calendar system. Their festival dates, ritual schedules, and community practices reflect the book's solar calculations. These groups chose theological purity over practical convenience, community integrity over broader acceptance. Jubilee time, how history was broken into blocks. Imagine history as a vast library where books are organized not by subject but by time periods of exactly 49 years each. Each section contains 7 shelves, and each shelf holds 7 years of human experience. This is how Jubilees envisions the flow of time, not as an endless river, but as carefully measured portions, each serving specific purposes in God's eternal plan. The Jubilee system transforms time from neutral medium into meaningful structure. Every 49th year marks a major transition point in human development. These aren't random milestones, but divinely established checkpoints where heaven evaluates earthly progress and initiates new phases of the cosmic plan. The book's authors understood that humans need manageable ways to comprehend vast timescales. Eternity overwhelms finite minds. Endless time creates despair. But time divided into meaningful segments becomes comprehensible, even comforting. Each Jubilee period has its own character, its own purposes, its own place in the larger story of divine justice. Jubilees begins its chronological system with Adam's creation, establishing this as the zero point from which all subsequent history flows. Every major biblical event receives precise dating within the Jubilee framework. Noah's flood occurs in the 10th Jubilee. Abraham receives his calling in the 19th Jubilee. Moses leads the Exodus in the 50th Jubilee. These dates aren't incidental details. They reveal the mathematical precision underlying apparent historical chaos. The 7-week structure within each Jubilee reflects the Sabbath principle extended through time. Just as Creation Week established the rhythm of work and rest, Jubilee periods establish rhythms of historical development. Periods of growth lead to periods of decline. Times of blessing give way to times of judgment. Seasons of corruption prepare for seasons of restoration. This cyclical understanding of time served therapeutic purposes for communities facing crisis. Present sufferings weren't unprecedented disasters. They were familiar stages in recurring patterns that had played out throughout history. Each generation faced similar challenges, made similar choices, and experienced similar consequences. Understanding these patterns provided both comfort and guidance. The Jubilee system also functions as a prophetic framework. By identifying where current events fit within the established pattern, readers can anticipate what comes next. If the present age resembles the corruption that preceded Noah's flood, then judgment and restoration must be approaching. If contemporary persecution echoes Abraham's trials, then divine vindication lies ahead. Beyond prediction, the Jubilee framework provides moral structure for understanding historical events. Each period serves specific purposes in God's plan for human development. Times of prosperity test whether people will remain faithful amid blessing. Periods of suffering refine character and deepen dependence on divine grace. Seasons of judgment clear away corruption to make space for renewal. The mathematical precision of the Jubilee system appeals to minds that find comfort in order and predictability. Where others saw random violence and meaningless suffering, Jubilees detected divine mathematics. Every tragedy served calculated purposes. Every triumph arrived on schedule. Even chaos followed heavenly equations. This chronological framework also addresses questions about divine justice that troubled ancient believers. If God is good and powerful, why do the wicked prosper while the righteous suffer? The Jubilee system provides answers. Justice operates according to precise timetables that span multiple generations. What appears delayed from human perspective is actually precisely timed from heaven's perspective. The book presents its chronological system as revealed knowledge rather than human speculation. The angel of the presence doesn't merely tell Moses what happened in the past. He reveals the temporal structure within which all events occur. This structure predates creation itself, existing in heaven's eternal plans before time began. Jubilee periods also serve as units of moral accounting. Each 49-year span accumulates a certain amount of righteousness or wickedness. When corruption reaches predetermined thresholds, divine intervention becomes necessary. When faithfulness achieves sufficient levels, blessing naturally follows. The system provides both warning and encouragement. The book's detailed chronology serves apologetic purposes by demonstrating that its theological system can organize all of biblical history coherently. Every patriarch, every king, every prophet fits precisely into the Jubilee framework. This comprehensive organization proves the system's divine origin rather than human invention. The Jubilee structure creates a sense of historical momentum moving toward predetermined goals. Time isn't merely passing, it's progressing through scheduled stages toward ultimate resolution. Each completed Jubilee brings the world closer to its final transformation. History has direction, purpose, and an approaching destination. For communities that felt lost in the chaos of their present moment, this temporal framework provided crucial orientation. They weren't experiencing random persecution, but scheduled tribulation. Their sufferings weren't meaningless, but served specific purposes in the larger plan. Their endurance contributed to the completion of time's great project. The book's chronological precision also functions as implicit criticism of those who fail to recognize the patterns of divine providence. Proper spiritual insight enables recognition of time's deeper rhythms. Those who miss these patterns reveal their spiritual blindness. Understanding Jubilee time becomes a mark of true wisdom. Retelling Genesis, but this time with a clock picture, the familiar story of creation, but now every event comes with a timestamp. Adam draws his first breath at precisely noon on Friday, the first day of the first month of the first year. Eve awakens on Saturday, the 8th day. Their first child is born in the third Jubilee, 4th week, first year. Suddenly, the timeless stories of beginnings become part of a cosmic schedule. This is how Jubilees transforms Genesis from narrative into chronology. Every conversation between God and humanity, every significant choice, every consequence receives precise dating within the book's mathematical framework. Time becomes a character in the story, as important as any human participant. The chronological precision serves multiple purposes. First, it demonstrates that nothing in human history occurs by accident. Every moment arrives according to divine planning. Second, it establishes patterns that repeat throughout subsequent generations. What happens to Adam and Eve previews what will happen to their descendants. Third, it transforms familiar stories into prophetic templates for understanding later events. Jubilees pay special attention to the timing of moral choices and their consequences. Adam and Eve live in Eden for exactly 7 years before their disobedience. Cain unlives Abel in the 4th Jubilee, 1st week, 4th year. The flood begins in the 10th Jubilee, 2nd week. These precise dates suggest that divine patience operates according to mathematical principles rather than arbitrary decisions. The book's retelling emphasizes themes largely absent from the Genesis account. Where scripture focuses on relationships and drama, Jubilees stresses law and calendar. Characters spend significant time learning proper festival observances, understanding ritual requirements, and receiving instruction about timekeeping. The patriarchs become teachers of divine law, rather than simply ancestors of the chosen people. This legal emphasis reflects the book's concern with contemporary religious debates. By showing that Adam, Noah, and Abraham already understood proper Sabbath observance, festival calendars, and purity laws, Jubilees argues that these practices represent original divine intention rather than later human innovation. The book's calendar system and ritual requirements aren't new inventions. They're restoration of creation's original design. The chronological framework also enables Jubilees to resolve apparent contradictions within Scripture. When Genesis provides conflicting genealogies or unclear timelines, Jubilees offers precise dates that organize all information coherently. The book presents itself as clarifying revelation rather than correcting error, but the practical effect is to replace biblical ambiguity with chronological certainty. Jubilees expands significantly on the roles of women in the Genesis narratives, but always within its systematic dating framework. Sarah receives her own revelations and prophecies, dated to specific years within the Jubilee system. Rebecca's marriage negotiations occur according to predetermined celestial timing. Rachel's children arrive according to heaven's schedule rather than human planning. The book transforms seemingly personal family decisions into cosmic events. When Abraham chooses to sacrifice Isaac, the date matters as much as the choice itself. The test occurs in the 40th Jubilee, providing a mathematical preview of humanity's ultimate trial. When Jacob wrestles with the angel, the encounter happens on a specific day that echoes previous divine-human confrontations and foreshadows future ones. Character development follows chronological patterns rather than psychological realism. People mature, make mistakes, and find redemption according to the timing established in heaven's tablets. Their choices matter, but their choices occur within predetermined windows of opportunity. Free will operates within divine scheduling rather than replacing it. The book's dating system creates a sense of historical momentum, building towards specific goals. Each generation moves closer to the fulfillment of promises made to their ancestors. Each Jubilee period brings humanity nearer to the restoration of Eden's perfection. Time becomes an ally rather than enemy, carrying faithful people toward their destined inheritance. Jubilees also uses chronology to address theological problems that troubled its original readers. Why did righteous people like Abel suffer while wicked people like Cain prospered? The precise dating reveals that justice operates according to longer timescales than individual lifespans. Divine vindication arrives according to heavenly schedule rather than human expectations. The book's mathematical approach to storytelling reflects broader cultural influences from the Hellenistic world. Greek philosophers emphasize the mathematical principles underlying natural phenomena. Jubilees applies similar thinking to historical phenomena, revealing the numerical patterns that govern human development through time. Yet, this systematic approach never entirely eliminates mystery from the biblical narratives. Characters still face genuine choices with uncertain outcomes. Divine purposes remain partially hidden until their appointed times of revelation. The chronological framework provides structure without destroying the essential drama of human-divine interaction. The expanded Genesis account serves as foundation for everything that follows in Jubilees. The patterns established in Creation Week, the consequences introduced through the fall, the cycles of corruption and judgment initiated in early generations, all provide templates for understanding later historical developments. By the time readers finish Jubilee's version of Genesis, they possess tools for interpreting their own historical moment. They understand how divine justice operates through time. They recognize the patterns that repeat across generations. They know their place within the cosmic schedule that began with Adam's first breath and continues toward its predetermined conclusion. The Watchers, the flood, and cycles of sin. Deep in the early ages of the world, before cities rose and empires fell, a group of heavenly beings made a choice that changed everything. The Watchers, angels assigned to observe human development, saw the daughters of humanity and found them beautiful. What began as observation became desire. What started as divine assignment became cosmic rebellion. This ancient story, mentioned briefly in Genesis but expanded dramatically in Jubilees, provides the key to understanding how corruption spreads through time. The fallen angels didn't simply disobey God. They introduced knowledge that humanity wasn't ready to handle. They taught people to make weapons, practice sorcery, and read the stars. They revealed secrets that belonged only in heaven. Jubilees presents this angelic rebellion as the first great turning point in human history. Before the Watchers' fall, people lived in relative innocence, following natural rhythms established at creation. After their corruption, humanity gained dangerous knowledge without wisdom to use it properly, technology without morality, power without restraint, knowledge without love. The consequences unfold according to predictable patterns. Each generation becomes more corrupt than the last. Violence increases, justice decreases. The earth itself becomes polluted by human wickedness. What began with angelic disobedience spreads until it threatens to destroy creation itself. This downward spiral follows mathematical progression rather than random decline. Sin accumulates across generations like compound interest on a debt that can never be repaid. Each act of wickedness makes the next act easier. Each compromise prepares the way for greater compromise. Each generation inherits more corruption than it passes on. Yet divine patience operates according to precise limits. God doesn't intervene immediately when corruption begins, but allows it to run its course until predetermined thresholds are reached. The flood doesn't arrive randomly. It comes exactly when heaven's mathematics demand cleansing. Divine mercy provides warnings. Divine justice provides deadlines. Noah represents the principle of faithful remnant preservation. In every generation, some people resist the downward pull of corruption. They maintain connection with divine purposes despite surrounding darkness. They preserve authentic traditions while others embrace deception. They become seeds for post-judgment renewal. The flood narrative in Jubilees emphasizes themes largely absent from Genesis. The book provides precise dates for every stage of the deluge. Water begins falling on the 17th day of the second month. The ark rests on the mountains in the seventh month. Noah leaves the ark exactly 1 year later. These dates aren't decorative. They establish the mathematical precision underlying divine judgment. Beyond chronological details, Jubilees reveals the cosmic scope of the flood's cleansing work. The deluge doesn't simply remove wicked people, it purifies the earth itself from angelic corruption. Polluted landscapes are washed clean. Corrupted vegetation is destroyed and renewed. Even the atmosphere requires cleansing from the breath of the wicked. The book presents Noah as more than mere survivor. He becomes the founder of the renewed world. After leaving the ark, he receives comprehensive instruction about proper worship, correct calendar observance, and divine law. The post-flood world begins with clear understanding of heaven's requirements, rather than the gradual discovery that characterized pre-flood development. Yet Jubilees recognizes that even Noah's renewal contains seeds of future corruption. His descendants gradually forget the lessons learned through judgment. They abandon proper practices, adopt false calendars, and repeat the mistakes of previous generations. The cycle of decline begins again, following patterns established before the flood. This cyclical understanding of history provided comfort for communities facing their own periods of corruption and decline. Present wickedness wasn't unprecedented. It followed familiar patterns that had played out repeatedly throughout human history. Each cycle of corruption prepared the way for divine cleansing and renewal. The book's account of angelic rebellion also addresses contemporary concerns about foreign cultural influences. Just as the Watchers introduced inappropriate knowledge to humanity, foreign rulers were introducing inappropriate customs to Jewish communities. Both represented mixing between separate realms that God intended to remain distinct. Jubilees uses the Watcher narrative to explain the persistence of evil despite divine judgment. Some of the fallen angels' offspring survived the flood as evil spirits, continuing to corrupt humanity through subsequent generations. This explains why post-flood humanity gradually returns to pre-flood levels of wickedness, despite having witnessed divine judgment. The flood story establishes the principle of divine intervention at calculated moments. God doesn't allow corruption to proceed indefinitely, but intervenes when predetermined limits are reached. This pattern reassures faithful readers that present suffering serves temporary purposes rather than permanent conditions. Noah's role as covenant recipient previews similar relationships between God and later figures like Abraham and Moses. Each major divine intervention includes revelation of law, establishment of calendar, and promise of future blessing. These covenants don't replace each other. They build upon previous foundations while addressing new historical circumstances. The Watcher's rebellion ultimately serves divine purposes despite its evil intentions. Their corruption makes divine judgment necessary. Their judgment makes renewal possible. Their continued influence makes human choice meaningful. Even cosmic rebellion becomes part of the larger plan for creation's ultimate restoration. Noah's prophecies and the division of the earth. As the floodwaters recede and dry land emerges, Noah stands at the threshold of a new world. But this isn't simply a story of survival and fresh beginnings. In Jubilees, Noah becomes a prophet whose words shape the destiny of nations yet to be born. His blessings and warnings echo through generations, establishing the moral geography that will govern human civilization. The book presents Noah as receiving detailed revelation about the future course of history. Standing on Mount Ararat, surrounded by his family and the animals they had preserved, Noah sees visions that span the centuries ahead. He understands how his three sons will father distinct branches of humanity. He foresees the rise and fall of kingdoms. He glimpses the ultimate destination toward which history moves. Noah's prophetic vision begins with geographic division. He allocates specific territories to each of his sons and their descendants. Shem receives the central portion of the earth, including the future sites of Jerusalem and Eden. Ham is given Africa and parts of Arabia. Japheth inherits the northern regions and islands of the sea. These aren't random assignments, they reflect divine intentions for human development. The territorial divisions carry moral weight as well as geographic significance. Shem's inheritance includes the most sacred locations on earth, establishing his descendants as custodians of divine revelation. Ham's territory lies largely outside the Promised Land, foreshadowing future conflicts between his descendants and the chosen people. Japheth's distant islands suggest both blessing and separation from the central drama of redemption. Jubilees presents these geographic prophecies as establishing permanent boundaries that human nations violate at their peril. When people groups migrate beyond their allocated territories or attempt to conquer lands assigned to others, they rebel against Noah's divinely inspired division. Geographic transgression becomes spiritual transgression. The book's account emphasizes the binding nature of oaths and blessings spoken by patriarchal figures. When Noah pronounces blessings on Shem and Japheth while cursing Ham's son Canaan, these words become cosmic decrees that shape subsequent history. Human speech, when aligned with divine purpose, possesses creative power that extends across generations. Noah's warnings prove as significant as his blessings. He foresees that his descendants will gradually forget the lessons learned through divine judgment. They will abandon proper worship, adopt false calendars, and repeat the sins that brought the flood. Each generation will face the choice between faithfulness and rebellion, memory and forgetfulness. The book presents Noah as establishing religious practices that will endure throughout human history. He builds the first post-flood altar, institutes proper sacrifice procedures, and receives instruction about festival observances. These aren't innovations. They restore practices that existed before corruption spread through the earth. Beyond religious instruction, Noah receives comprehensive legal guidance that becomes foundation for human justice systems. The prohibition against consuming blood establishes respect for life as fundamental principle. Capital punishment for intentional violence creates deterrent against the kind of lawlessness that provoked divine judgment. These laws apply to all humanity, not just Noah's immediate family. The territorial divisions also serve prophetic purposes by establishing the geographic framework within which biblical history will unfold. Abraham's journey from Mesopotamia to Canaan follows lines established in Noah's allocation. The exodus from Egypt moves through territories assigned to Ham's descendants. The Babylonian exile returns people to Shem's original inheritance. Jubilees uses Noah's prophecies to address contemporary political concerns facing its original readers. When foreign empires controlled Jewish territories, faithful readers could remember that these lands were assigned to Shem's descendants according to divine decree. Temporary occupation by outsiders didn't invalidate permanent allocation established through Noah's prophetic authority. The book's emphasis on geographic boundaries reflects broader concerns about cultural boundaries within Second Temple Judaism. Just as nations were assigned specific territories, religious communities needed clear boundaries to maintain their distinct identities. Mixing between groups assigned to separate spheres led to corruption and judgment. Noah's role as prophetic patriarch establishes patterns that recur throughout Jubilees. Each major figure receives revelation about future developments, speaks words that shape coming events, and serves as link between divine purposes and human history. These aren't passive recipients of blessing, they become active participants in providence. The book presents the division of the earth as rational response to potential human conflicts rather than arbitrary divine decision. By establishing clear boundaries before population growth creates competition for territory, Noah prevents wars that would otherwise arise from unclear ownership. Divine wisdom anticipates human nature and provides structures that channel it constructively. Yet Jubilees recognizes that even divinely established boundaries cannot prevent all human conflict. Noah's prophecies include warnings about future violations of territorial assignments, territorial conflicts between brother nations, and the need for divine intervention to restore proper order. Geography provides framework, but human choice determines outcomes. The prophetic authority attributed to Noah serves apologetic purposes by demonstrating that divine revelation didn't begin with Moses or even Abraham. From the earliest post-flood generations, faithful humans received insight into divine purposes and responsibility for transmitting that knowledge to their descendants. Revelation represents continuity rather than innovation. Abraham and the covenant timeline. Picture Abraham standing beneath a canopy of stars. In Genesis, he receives promises about his descendants, but Jubilees transforms this scene into something far more precise. Here, Abraham becomes a prophet who sees the future mapped out like a calendar. The text places this vision in Abraham's 99th year. More than a simple promise, this moment carries the weight of divine clockwork. Abraham witnesses Israel's entire timeline stretching ahead: 400 years of bondage, 40 years in the wilderness, the conquest of Canaan. Each event arrives with its appointed date. This vision serves a purpose beyond storytelling. The authors of Jubilees lived in troubled times. Foreign empires pressed against their borders. Religious traditions faced constant challenges. Therefore, they needed Abraham's vision to prove that current suffering was always part of the plan. What appeared as chaos actually followed divine order. Abraham sees the temple's construction and destruction. He watches kings rise and fall. He observes the people's faithfulness waver like candlelight in wind. But each phase carries its predetermined length. History moves forward like seasons, each with its proper time and purpose. The covenant becomes more than a promise between God and Abraham. It transforms into a legal document with specific terms and deadlines. Abraham's descendants will inherit the land, but only after fulfilling their assigned trials. The timeline cannot be rushed or delayed. Within this vision, moral instruction weaves through prophetic revelation. Abraham learns that righteousness extends beyond personal behavior. It requires alignment with cosmic timing. Those who observe proper festivals at proper moments participate in heavenly rhythms. Those who ignore these patterns drift toward chaos. The text reveals how Abraham passes this knowledge to Isaac and Jacob. Each generation receives pieces of the timeline puzzle, but the complete picture remains hidden until Moses receives the full revelation. Abraham plants the seeds. Moses harvests the complete garden of prophetic knowledge. Jubilees presents Abraham's vision as historical fact rather than religious imagination. The authors wanted their readers to understand that Israel's destiny was never uncertain. Every triumph and setback followed a pattern established before the world began. This certainty offered comfort during periods when the future seemed dark and unpredictable. The vision also establishes Israel's unique relationship with time itself. Other nations follow earthly chronologies, but Abraham's descendants operate according to heavenly calendars. Their festivals align with angelic celebrations. Their Jubilee years mirror cosmic rhythms that govern the universe. Abraham's prophetic gift extends beyond Israel's story. He sees the rise and fall of great empires. Egypt will dominate the ancient world, then fade into memory. Babylon will conquer nations, then crumble beneath Persian armies. Each empire receives its allotted span, no more and no less. The covenant timeline serves as both comfort and warning. God's promises to Abraham guarantee Israel's survival through every trial, but survival requires faithful adherence to divine commands. The timeline offers security to those who remain obedient. It threatens judgment for those who abandon their covenant responsibilities. Through Abraham's vision, Jubilees argues that prophecy and history are identical. What appears as prediction actually describes events that already exist in heavenly records. The future unfolds according to plans written before creation began. Human choices matter, but they operate within predetermined boundaries. This perspective transforms how readers understand their present circumstances. Political oppression becomes a scheduled phase in the cosmic timeline. Religious persecution represents a test with known duration. Victory and defeat both serve divine purposes that transcend human understanding. Abraham emerges from his vision with complete confidence in God's plan. He no longer worries about his descendants' future because he has witnessed their entire story. This certainty allows him to face present challenges with unwavering faith. The covenant timeline becomes his anchor in storms of doubt and confusion. 70 nations, 70 clocks. Imagine the world as a vast clockworks, each nation operating on its own divine timer. Jubilees presents exactly this vision. Noah's descendants scatter across the earth, but their dispersion follows a careful plan. Each group receives its designated territory and allotted time span. The text counts 70 nations emerging from Noah's family. This number carries deep meaning in ancient thought. 70 represents completeness, divine order, and cosmic harmony. Each nation operates like a gear in heaven's great machine. Their movements create the rhythm of human history. These national timers begin ticking at the moment of dispersion. Some nations receive longer spans, others shorter ones. The length depends on their assigned role in the divine plan. Nations chosen for great empires get extended time. Those meant for smaller purposes operate on abbreviated schedules. Jubilees reveals that angels oversee each nation's timeline. These celestial beings serve as divine administrators, ensuring that earthly events follow heavenly blueprints. When a nation's time expires, its angelic guardian steps aside. The nation then faces conquest, absorption, or gradual decline. Israel stands apart from this system. While other nations operate under angelic supervision, Israel answers directly to the divine presence. This special relationship grants them unique privileges and responsibilities. They alone can extend their timeline through faithful obedience. They alone face immediate consequences for covenant violations. The 70-nation framework explains why empires rise and fall in predictable patterns. Egypt dominates the ancient world for centuries, then gradually loses influence. Assyria conquers vast territories, then disappears from history. Babylon rules the known world, then yields to Persian authority. Each transition follows the cosmic schedule. This system comforts readers facing political uncertainty. Their current oppressors may seem invincible, but they operate under divine time limits. No earthly power can extend its reign beyond its appointed span. Therefore, suffering has boundaries. Injustice carries expiration dates. Hope remains reasonable even in darkest circumstances. The national timelines also serve as warning systems. When Israel observes neighboring empires collapsing, they recognize signs of cosmic transition. Old orders give way to new arrangements. These moments offer opportunities for restoration if Israel aligns itself with divine timing. Each nation's clock runs according to its moral character. Righteous peoples receive time extensions as rewards for good behavior. Wicked nations face shortened spans as punishment for their crimes. Justice operates through temporal mechanics rather than immediate intervention. The 70 clocks create an intricate web of cause and effect. One nation's decline creates space for another's expansion. Regional power shifts follow domino patterns that stretch across centuries. What appears as random historical change actually follows precise calculations. Jubilees uses this framework to explain Israel's unique position among nations. They possess the only renewable timeline. Other peoples face fixed limits, but Israel can reset their clock through repentance and covenant renewal. This privilege comes with the burden of higher standards and greater accountability. The text suggests that wise leaders study these national patterns. Those who understand cosmic timing can position their people for success during transitional periods. Those who ignore divine schedules face unexpected defeats despite apparent strength. The 70-nation system reaches its climax in the final age. All national timelines converge toward a single endpoint. The great clockworks winds down as history approaches its conclusion. Nations that exceeded their allotted time face judgment. Those that remained within divine boundaries participate in the coming restoration. This vision transforms how readers view international politics. Earthly diplomacy operates on surface levels, while deeper forces determine ultimate outcomes. Military strength matters less than alignment with cosmic timing. Economic power fades before moral accountability measured in heavenly courts. The national clocks also explain why some empires seem unstoppable while others crumble quickly. Those operating within their divine time span enjoy supernatural protection. Those exceeding their limits face invisible resistance that undermines their apparent advantages. Understanding these patterns helps readers navigate turbulent times with wisdom and patience. The angelic ledger, everything already written. High above earthly concerns, a vast library contains the complete record of existence. Jubilees describes tablets of testimony where every action, thought, and intention finds permanent inscription. These heavenly ledgers operate beyond human time, recording events before they unfold in earthly reality. The angelic scribes work with divine precision. Their quills never rest, their ink never fades. Each human choice appears on the tablets at the moment of decision. But the tablets also contain future events, written in letters of light that pulse with certainty. Past, present, and future merge into one eternal record. This cosmic archive serves multiple purposes in Jubilee's worldview. First, it guarantees divine justice. Every good deed receives proper recognition. Every harmful act faces appropriate consequences. The ledgers ensure that nothing escapes divine attention or slips through cracks of forgotten memory. Second, the tablets establish the certainty of prophetic promises. When Abraham receives visions of Israel's future, he glimpses pages from the angelic records. When Moses learns about coming events, he reads from sections already inscribed in heavenly books. Prophecy becomes less about prediction and more about revelation of existing documentation. The ledger system explains why some people seem to know things before they happen. Prophets and visionaries gain access to specific sections of the heavenly archive. They read tomorrow's news from today's celestial newspapers. Their insights come not from supernatural intuition, but from privileged access to divine records. Jubilees presents the tablets as the ultimate source of all written law. Moses doesn't create commandments during his mountain encounter. Instead, he copies regulations from pages that existed before creation began. Human law represents imperfect transcription of perfect heavenly legislation. The closer earthly codes match their celestial originals, the more effective they become. The angelic ledgers also account for historical patterns that seem to repeat across generations. Similar situations produce similar outcomes because they follow templates preserved in the heavenly archive. The tablets contain standard responses to common human choices. History echoes because it references the same divine playbook. This system provides comfort for those struggling with life's apparent randomness. Events that seem chaotic on Earth follow clear patterns in the celestial records. Suffering serves purposes that become clear when viewed from the tablet's eternal perspective. Pain has meaning when understood as part of larger narratives already written in heaven's books. The ledger concept addresses questions about divine fairness. How can God judge people for actions they haven't yet committed? Because the tablets record choices at the moment of moral decision, not at the time of physical action. Divine judgment responds to internal commitment rather than external performance. The ledgers track heart intentions alongside observable behavior. Jubilee suggests that righteous individuals can sometimes glimpse their own entries in the heavenly archive. These moments of insight provide guidance for difficult decisions and comfort during challenging circumstances. Knowing that one's name appears in positive sections of the ledgers offers hope that transcends temporary troubles. The tablets also explain why certain prayers receive immediate answers while others face long delays. The angelic records contain the optimal timing for every divine response. Some requests require immediate fulfillment. Others must wait for proper circumstances to develop. The ledgers coordinate earthly needs with cosmic timing. The heavenly archive operates according to principles that transcend human understanding. The scribes write with instruments forged from compressed starlight. Their parchment consists of crystallized time itself. Their library extends through dimensions that exist beyond earthly space, yet their records directly influence every aspect of mortal experience. Jubilees reveals that the tablets contain correction mechanisms for earthly errors. When human copies of divine law become corrupted through transmission mistakes, the heavenly originals remain perfect. Future generations can restore accurate texts by consulting the angelic archives through prayer, fasting, and faithful study. The ledger system reaches its climax during the final judgment. The tablets open to reveal every person's complete record. Nothing remains hidden or forgotten. The archives provide perfect evidence for divine decisions about eternal destinies. Justice prevails because the records cannot lie, cannot be altered, and cannot overlook relevant details. This vision transforms how readers understand their daily choices. Every action contributes to an eternal record that will eventually face divine review. But the tablets also record God's mercy alongside human failure. Repentance creates new entries that overshadow previous mistakes. The ledgers document redemption as clearly as they chronicle rebellion. Sin as a ticking clock. Within Jubilees' cosmic framework, sin operates like water filling a reservoir. Each wrongful act adds to an accumulating total. When the divine container reaches capacity, consequences must follow. The text presents moral failure not as isolated incidents, but as contributions to a growing crisis that demands resolution. This understanding transforms how readers view both individual and collective wrongdoing. Personal sins join a larger stream that flows toward divine judgment. Small compromises combine with major rebellions to push creation toward tipping points where heaven must intervene. Every lie, every act of cruelty, every moment of unfaithfulness advances the cosmic clock toward midnight. The accumulation process follows specific rules in Jubilees' system. Certain sins carry greater weight than others. Violations of covenant obligations count more heavily than general moral failures. Sins committed by leaders create larger problems than identical acts by ordinary people. The timing of wrongdoing also matters. Sins during sacred seasons accelerate the filling process. Jubilees presents this system as a form of divine patience rather than divine wrath. The accumulation period allows time for repentance, correction, and return to righteousness. Heaven waits as long as possible before responding to human failure. But patience has limits. When the reservoir overflows, judgment becomes inevitable. The text reveals that angels monitor the accumulation process. These celestial accountants track sin levels for individuals, families, communities, and nations. They maintain careful records of moral debts and credits. When balances reach critical levels, they notify higher authorities about approaching intervention points. Different types of sin produce different effects on the cosmic timeline. Idolatry corrodes the spiritual atmosphere, making prayer and worship less effective. Violence creates tears in the fabric of community life that require divine mending. Sexual immorality pollutes bloodlines and confuses genealogical records that matter for covenant inheritance. The accumulation system explains why judgment sometimes seems delayed or disproportionate. A seemingly minor violation might trigger major consequences because it represents the final drop in an already full container. Conversely, apparently serious offenses might receive mild responses because the accumulation level hasn't yet reached critical mass. Jubilees describes how righteous actions can slow or reverse the accumulation process. Good deeds create credits that offset moral debits. Acts of mercy, justice, and faithfulness drain sin from the cosmic reservoir. This system encourages hope even in dark times. Positive choices can buy time for broader repentance and restoration. The text reveals that certain locations accumulate sin more rapidly than others. Sacred sites like temples and altars become polluted quickly when misused. Cities and regions known for particular sins develop spiritual contamination that affects everyone living there. Conversely, places dedicated to righteousness provide partial protection from accumulating moral damage. Generational patterns play important roles in the accumulation system. Children inherit both the benefits and burdens of their ancestors' choices. Righteous parents create spiritual capital for their descendants. Wicked parents pass along moral debts that compound over time. This understanding emphasizes the long-term consequences of present decisions. The sin accumulation concept helps explain natural disasters and political upheavals in Jubilees' worldview. Earthquakes, famines, and wars result from moral pollution that has reached critical levels. These events serve as pressure release mechanisms that prevent even worse consequences. They also function as warning systems that encourage repentance before final judgment arrives. Jubilees suggests that wise individuals learn to read the signs of accumulating moral crisis. They observe increasing frequency of conflicts, growing social inequality, and declining respect for sacred traditions. These indicators reveal how close their community has moved toward divine intervention. Such awareness enables proactive responses that might avert disaster. The text describes purification rituals and community reforms as methods for reducing accumulated sin. Proper observance of festivals, faithful tithing, and acts of social justice create spiritual cleansing that lowers the moral pollution levels. Communities can literally buy themselves more time through increased righteousness. The accumulation system reaches its ultimate expression in the final age, described by Jubilees. All human sin throughout history contributes to a cosmic crisis that demands definitive resolution. The reservoir of human wrongdoing finally overflows, triggering the judgment that cleanses creation and establishes divine justice. But even then, the text suggests possibilities for mercy and restoration for those who align themselves with righteousness before the final tipping point arrives. This framework encourages both individual responsibility and collective action. Personal choices matter because they contribute to larger moral equations. Community decisions carry special weight because they affect accumulation rates for entire populations. Understanding these connections motivates more careful attention to moral choices and their long-term consequences. Israel's story as a warning system. The history of Israel unfolds like a teaching manual within Jubilees. Each triumph and failure serves as instruction for future generations. The text reshapes familiar biblical narratives to reveal patterns of divine response to human choices. Every story carries lessons about the consequences of faithfulness and rebellion. Jacob's wrestling match becomes more than personal struggle. It demonstrates how divine encounters transform those who persist through difficulty. His new name, Israel, establishes him as father of a people destined for both blessing and burden. The wrestling foreshadows his descendants' ongoing tension between earthly concerns and heavenly calling. The 12 sons of Jacob each contribute to the developing pattern. Joseph's dreams reveal divine plans that transcend immediate circumstances. His brother's jealousy shows how family conflicts can serve larger purposes. The entire Egyptian sojourn demonstrates how apparent disasters can position Israel for future blessings. What looks like enslavement actually becomes preparation for nationhood. Moses' birth during oppression illustrates divine timing in rescue operations. His upbringing in Pharaoh's household provides him with education and connections necessary for his later leadership role. His flight to Midian develops his wilderness skills essential for the Exodus journey. Every detail of his preparation serves the eventual liberation plan. The Exodus itself becomes a template for divine intervention. Plagues demonstrate heaven's power over earthly authorities. The Red Sea crossing shows how impossible circumstances can transform into divine highways. The wilderness wandering reveals both the patience and discipline of divine education. Each element provides instruction for later generations facing their own crises. Mount Sinai represents the climax of Israel's educational process. The law given there establishes standards that will determine their future prosperity or punishment. The golden calf incident immediately tests their commitment and reveals the consequences of covenant violation. The pattern of revelation followed by testing becomes a recurring theme throughout their history. The conquest of Canaan demonstrates both divine faithfulness and the importance of complete obedience. Cities fall because heaven fights for Israel, but incomplete conquest creates ongoing problems that plague later generations. The text shows how partial obedience produces partial success, while complete commitment yields complete victory. The period of Judges reveals the cyclical nature of Israel's relationship with their divine covenant. Faithfulness brings peace and prosperity. Complacency leads to moral compromise. Compromise results in oppression by enemies. Oppression drives them back to their covenant obligations. Each cycle teaches the same lesson about the consequences of spiritual choices. King David's reign represents the high point of Israel's earthly success. His military victories and political achievements demonstrate what becomes possible when leadership aligns with divine purposes. But his personal failures also reveal that even great leaders face moral tests that affect their entire nation. Success creates its own spiritual dangers. Solomon's wisdom and wealth show the heights Israel can reach under divine blessing. The temple's construction fulfills ancient promises and establishes proper worship. But his foreign marriages and tolerance of idolatry demonstrate how compromise creeps in gradually. His reign's latter years foreshadow the division and decline that will follow. The divided kingdom period reveals how internal conflicts weaken Israel's ability to fulfill their covenant calling. Northern and southern kingdoms compete with each other instead of cooperating against common enemies. This division makes them vulnerable to foreign invasion and internal corruption. The text shows how unity serves divine purposes, while division invites disaster. The Babylonian exile represents the ultimate consequence of accumulated covenant violations. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple demonstrates that no place or institution enjoys immunity from divine judgment. But the exile also serves as purification that prepares faithful remnants for eventual restoration. Even judgment serves educational purposes. The return from exile offers hope for renewal and restoration. Those who learn from their ancestors' mistakes can avoid repeating their failures. The rebuilt temple and renewed covenant provide opportunities for fresh starts, but the text suggests that the same patterns of testing will continue. Each generation must choose between faithfulness and compromise. Jubilees presents this entire historical sequence as a warning system for its contemporary readers. They face similar choices to those confronted by their ancestors. The outcomes of past decisions reveal the consequences of present options. History becomes prophecy because human nature and divine responses remain consistent across generations. The text suggests that understanding these historical patterns provides practical guidance for navigation through current challenges. Political oppression, religious persecution, and cultural pressure create testing situations similar to those faced by previous generations. The responses that brought success or failure in the past will produce similar results in the present. This historical framework also offers hope during difficult circumstances. Israel's story includes periods of exile and restoration, judgment and mercy, failure and renewal. Present troubles fit within larger patterns that ultimately serve divine purposes. Even apparent defeats can become setups for future victories when viewed from the perspective of Israel's complete story. Reading between the lines, political allegory. Beneath Jubilees' religious narrative runs a hidden stream of political commentary. The ancient authors lived under foreign rule, facing pressure to abandon their traditions. Direct criticism would invite persecution. Therefore, they embedded their resistance within stories of ancient patriarchs and primeval history. Modern readers must decode these veiled messages to understand the text's original purpose. The Tale of Babel carries special significance in this coded communication. On the surface, it explains the origin of different languages. But the tower also represents imperial ambitions that challenge divine authority. The story warns against rulers who believe human power can reach heaven. The confusion and scattering that follow serve as predictions of what awaits contemporary empires that overreach their boundaries. Abraham's departure from Ur becomes more than personal obedience to divine calling. It models resistance to imperial culture and idolatrous practices. His willingness to leave prosperity behind demonstrates the kind of commitment required from Jews facing pressure to assimilate into Greek or Roman society. His material success in Canaan proves that faithfulness brings greater rewards than compromise. The conflict between Isaac and Ishmael reflects tensions between different approaches to covenant identity. Ishmael represents those who seek to blend Jewish faith with foreign influences. Isaac embodies those who maintain pure adherence to ancestral traditions. The text favors Isaac's approach while acknowledging Ishmael's continued existence and partial blessing. Jacob's struggles with Laban mirror the experiences of Jews living under foreign authority. Laban constantly changes the terms of their agreement, forcing Jacob to adapt his strategies. But divine blessing ensures Jacob's eventual prosperity despite Laban's unfair treatment. The story encourages readers facing similar exploitation by promising that righteousness ultimately prevails over corruption. Esau's portrayal carries special political weight in Jubilees. His marriage to foreign women and abandonment of birthright traditions make him a symbol of assimilation and compromise. His descendants become identified with Rome in later Jewish thought. The text's negative treatment of Esau reflects resistance to Roman cultural influence and political domination. The Egyptian sojourn provides a template for understanding foreign rule. Initially, Jacob's family enjoys protection and prosperity under Pharaoh's authority, but new rulers who forget Joseph's contributions begin oppressing the Israelites. This pattern warns about the temporary nature of political arrangements and the importance of maintaining distinct identity during periods of toleration. Moses' confrontation with Pharaoh represents the ultimate model for resistance to tyrannical authority. The plagues demonstrate that divine power exceeds earthly might. Pharaoh's stubborn refusal to release Israel parallels the behavior of contemporary rulers who ignore divine commands. The eventual exodus proves that oppression has limits and liberation becomes inevitable. The wilderness period teaches lessons about survival under divine guidance rather than human protection. Israel learns to depend on heaven for daily provisions instead of relying on earthly alliances. This education prepares them for independence and self governance according to divine law rather than foreign customs. The conquest narratives contain veiled encouragement for resistance to foreign occupation. The Canaanite nations represent forces of corruption that must be removed from the promised land. Their elimination ensures the purity necessary for proper covenant observance. Contemporary readers facing similar corrupting influences can draw inspiration from these ancient victories. The cycle of Judges reveals the ongoing struggle between covenant faithfulness and cultural accommodation. Periods of foreign oppression follow times when Israel adopts neighboring customs. Liberation comes through leaders who call the people back to their distinct identity and practices. This pattern provides hope for readers facing similar cycles of oppression and resistance. David's rise from shepherd to king offers encouragement to those feeling powerless under foreign rule. His victory over Goliath demonstrates that apparent weakness can overcome imposing strength when supported by divine favor. His military successes show what becomes possible when leadership aligns with covenant principles rather than pragmatic accommodation. Solomon's later reign serves as a warning about the dangers of political alliance with foreign powers. His marriages to foreign princesses bring idolatrous influences into Israel's heart. His building projects require forced labor that oppresses his own people. The text suggests that political success achieved through compromise ultimately leads to national division and decline. The exile and restoration cycle provides a complete template for understanding foreign domination and eventual liberation. Unfaithfulness leads to conquest and displacement, but repentance and renewed commitment to covenant obligations prepare the way for return and restoration. The pattern offers hope that current oppression serves temporary purposes within larger divine plans. Jubilees embeds these political messages within religious narratives to avoid direct confrontation with authorities while providing guidance and encouragement to readers facing cultural and political pressure. The ancient stories become instruction manuals for contemporary resistance, survival, and eventual triumph through faithfulness to covenant identity. Holy geography, mapping morality. The landscape itself carries moral weight within Jubilee's worldview. Sacred locations pulse with spiritual energy that affects human behavior. Profane places contaminate those who linger there. The text transforms geography into theology, making every mountain, valley, and river a player in the cosmic drama between good and evil. Eden represents the original template for perfect harmony between heaven and earth. Its 4 rivers carry life-giving water to the entire world. The tree of life offers immortality to those who remain in proper relationship with their Creator. But Eden's gates close after human disobedience, making it inaccessible until the final restoration. The garden becomes a geographic symbol of lost innocence and future hope. Mount Ararat serves as the launching point for humanity's fresh start after the flood. Noah's family begins repopulating the earth from this elevated sanctuary. The mountain represents divine mercy that preserves life through judgment, but it also marks the beginning of new opportunities for both faithfulness and failure. Each generation must choose whether to remember the lessons learned on Ararat's slopes. The Tower of Babel transforms flat terrain into a symbol of human arrogance. The plain provides space for massive construction projects that attempt to reach heaven through human effort. But the horizontal landscape cannot support vertical ambitions that challenge divine authority. The confusion and scattering that follow demonstrate that geographic advantages mean nothing without moral alignment. Abraham's journey traces a spiritual geography that leads from idolatry toward covenant relationship. Each stop along his route teaches lessons about faith and obedience. Represents the comfortable prosperity that must be abandoned for divine calling. Haran serves as a temporary resting place that tests commitment to continued progress. Canaan becomes the promised destination where faithfulness receives its reward. Mount Moriah stands as the ultimate testing ground where Abraham demonstrates complete surrender to divine commands. The mountain's elevation symbolizes the heights of faith required for covenant relationship. Isaac's rescue reveals divine provision for those who hold nothing back. The location later becomes the site for Solomon's temple, connecting Abraham's faith with institutional worship. Egypt transforms from sanctuary to prison as political circumstances change. Initially, the fertile delta provides refuge during famine. Joseph's success demonstrates divine blessing in foreign territory, but new rulers convert blessing into burden. The land that once welcomed Jacob's family begins crushing their descendants. Geography remains neutral, while moral conditions determine its effects on human welfare. The wilderness serves as classroom and testing ground where Israel learns to depend on divine provision rather than earthly resources. The harsh environment strips away false securities and reveals true sources of strength. Manna appears each morning to teach daily dependence. Water flows from rocks to demonstrate supernatural provision. The desert's challenges prepare Israel for the responsibilities of the promised land. Mount Sinai represents the meeting point between heaven and earth, where divine law intersects human experience. The mountains trembling and smoking reveal the awesome nature of divine presence. Moses' ascent symbolizes the human capacity for divine encounter. The tablets of law provide permanent connection between heavenly standards and earthly behavior. Sinai becomes geography sanctified by divine visitation. The Jordan River serves as boundary between wilderness wandering and promised land settlement. Crossing its waters symbolizes transition from preparation to fulfillment. The miraculous parting demonstrates divine power operating through natural elements. The 12 stones taken from the riverbed create permanent memorial to divine intervention. Geography becomes sacrament when touched by divine action. Jerusalem emerges as the center point where divine presence chooses to dwell among humanity. The city's elevation represents its spiritual significance. David's capture of the stronghold demonstrates that divine favor matters more than military advantage. Solomon's temple transforms the location into Earth's primary connection point with heaven. Jerusalem becomes geography consecrated for eternal purposes. The Temple Mount carries special significance as the meeting place between divine holiness and human worship. The building's design reflects heavenly patterns revealed to Moses and David. The Holy of Holies represents the ultimate sanctuary where divine presence dwells. The altar provides the designated location for sacrificial offerings. Every element of the temple's geography serves specific spiritual functions. Exile geography teaches lessons about the consequences of covenant violation. Babylon becomes the place of punishment where Jerusalem survivors learn to maintain their identity without their sacred locations. The foreign landscape tests their commitment to ancestral traditions. Rivers of Babylon become places of mourning and remembrance. Geographic displacement serves spiritual discipline. The return to Jerusalem represents the restoration of proper relationship between people and sacred space. The rebuilt temple reestablishes the connection between heaven and earth. The restored city walls provide security for renewed covenant observance. Geographic restoration symbolizes spiritual renewal. Sacred space regains its intended function as the bridge between divine and human realms. Jubilees suggests that the final restoration will transform all geography into sacred space. Eden's garden will expand to encompass the entire earth. Jerusalem's temple will become unnecessary because divine presence will fill every location. Mountains and valleys will pulse with life-giving energy. The physical landscape will perfectly reflect the moral purity of its inhabitants. This geographic theology encourages readers to view their own locations through moral lenses. Sacred spaces require respectful behavior and careful maintenance. Profane locations need transformation through righteous presence and faithful action. Every place carries potential for either spiritual elevation or moral contamination. Geography and morality interweave to create the fabric of human experience within divine purposes. Timekeeping as resistance, Jubilees and for an Enoch. Two ancient texts emerge from similar circumstances with remarkably parallel visions. Jubilees and First Enoch both arise from Jewish communities struggling to maintain their identity under foreign rule. Both authors obsess over calendars, angels, and predetermined timelines. Both present time itself as a weapon in the struggle between divine truth and earthly corruption. First Enoch begins with the patriarch's mysterious translation to heaven, where he witnesses the cosmic machinery that governs earthly events. Jubilees starts with Moses receiving identical information from an angel on Mount Sinai. Both texts claim access to heavenly archives where future events are already recorded in permanent ink. This parallel structure suggests they originate from similar sectarian circles with shared theological concerns. The calendar controversy unites both texts in opposition to mainstream Jewish practice. First Enoch reveals that the sun, moon, and stars follow a 364-day yearly cycle that aligns with divine purposes. Jubilees makes the same claim, arguing that the 354-day lunar calendar corrupts proper festival observance. Both authors present their alternative system as revealed truth rather than human innovation. This calendrical resistance carries deep political implications. The temple authorities in Jerusalem follow the traditional lunar calendar for determining festival dates. By promoting a different system, both texts challenge not just religious practices but the entire power structure that controls Jewish religious life. Their alternative calendar becomes a form of sectarian identity that separates true believers from compromised mainstream leadership. Both texts feature fallen angels who corrupt human society by revealing forbidden knowledge. In First Enoch, these watchers teach humanity metallurgy, cosmetics, and warfare. Jubilees describes how these same beings pollute bloodlines and introduce violence to the earth. The fallen angels represent foreign influences that threaten Jewish purity and traditional ways of life. The flood narratives in both texts expand far beyond the biblical account. First Enoch provides detailed descriptions of the giants who terrorize antediluvian society. Jubilees explains how these supernatural beings continue influencing history even after the flood waters recede. Both authors use the flood story to warn about the consequences of accommodation with corrupting influences. Noah emerges as a central figure in both texts, but his role extends beyond simple survival of divine judgment. In First Enoch, he receives prophetic visions about future ages and the final judgment. Jubilees presents him as a calendar keeper who preserves proper timekeeping through the flood crisis. Both texts make Noah a symbol of faithful preservation of divine truth during periods of cosmic upheaval. The astronomical sections of First Enoch find their complement in Jubilees' chronological precision. Enoch learns about the movements of celestial bodies and their influence on earthly events. Jubilees provides exact dates for historical events and future predictions. Both texts present time and space as interconnected systems under divine control rather than random natural forces. Divine judgment themes permeate both works, but with careful attention to timing and procedure. First, Enoch describes the great assize where every human action faces evaluation. Jubilees outlines the Jubilee periods that lead up to final restoration. Both texts comfort their readers with assurances that current oppression has predetermined limits and justice will eventually triumph. The preservation of both texts at Qumran demonstrates their importance to sectarian communities that rejected mainstream Jewish leadership. The Essenes treasured these writings because they provided alternative sources of religious authority. Rather than accepting the interpretations of Jerusalem's priesthood, sectarian readers could consult heavenly revelations preserved in Enoch and Jubilees. Both texts exhibit similar attitudes toward foreign cultural influence. First, Enoch warns against the corrupting effects of angelic knowledge that parallels Greek philosophy and science. Jubilees insists on strict separation from neighboring peoples and their customs. Both authors fear that accommodation leads to the loss of distinct Jewish identity and relationship with the divine. The shared emphasis on predetermined history serves similar psychological functions in both texts. First, Enoch assures readers that their current suffering fits within larger patterns known to heaven. Jubilees provides precise timelines that limit the duration of present troubles. Both works transform anxiety about an uncertain future into confidence about divine control over historical processes. Prophetic authority operates similarly in both texts through claims of heavenly access rather than traditional succession. Enoch receives his revelations through mystical ascent to divine throne rooms. Moses learns from angels who possess complete knowledge of past and future events. Both approaches bypass conventional religious hierarchies by appealing directly to supernatural sources. The moral instruction in both texts emphasizes the cosmic consequences of individual choices. First, Enoch describes how personal sins contribute to universal corruption that demands divine intervention. Jubilees shows how covenant violations accumulate toward judgment, while faithful actions support cosmic harmony. Both works motivate ethical behavior through appeals to transcendent significance rather than immediate consequences. These parallel themes suggest that Jubilees and First Enoch emerge from overlapping communities, sharing similar concerns about religious authority, cultural identity, and divine justice. Their combined influence shapes sectarian Judaism's distinctive approach to scripture, prophecy, and resistance to foreign domination. Together, they provide alternative vision of Jewish faith that challenges mainstream accommodation with Hellenistic culture and Roman political authority. The prophetic timeline begins. At the heart of Jubilees lies a carefully constructed chronology that divides all of history into manageable segments. The authors take the concept of Jubilee years from Leviticus and transform it into a cosmic clock that measures the progression from creation to final restoration. Each period of 49 years becomes a chapter in the predetermined story of divine purpose unfolding through time. The system begins with creation itself, marked as the first Jubilee period. Adam and Eve's time in Eden occupies the opening segments of this cosmic calendar. Their expulsion marks the transition to a new phase where humanity must learn to live outside paradise. Each subsequent Jubilee brings its own characteristics, challenges, and divine responses. The flood arrives precisely on schedule according to this chronological framework. Noah's generation reaches a point where moral corruption demands cosmic intervention. But even judgment follows the predetermined timeline. The flood doesn't represent divine anger losing control. Instead, it demonstrates heaven's commitment to maintaining the cosmic schedule regardless of human resistance. Post-flood humanity receives a fresh start, but within the same temporal structure. The Tower of Babel incident occurs at its appointed time. Abraham's calling happens according to the cosmic calendar. Each patriarchal generation lives out their assigned roles during their designated periods. Personal choices matter, but they operate within predetermined timeframes. The Exodus from Egypt represents a major transition point in the prophetic timeline. Israel's bondage lasts exactly as long as the Jubilee system requires. Their liberation coincides with cosmic schedule rather than human political circumstances. Moses leads them out of slavery not because Pharaoh finally yields, but because the appointed time for freedom has arrived. The conquest of Canaan follows similar temporal logic. Joshua's military campaigns succeed because they align with divine timing rather than superior strategy or overwhelming force. The Promised Land becomes available to Israel precisely when the cosmic calendar opens that window of opportunity. Earlier attempts would have failed. Later delays would have missed the moment. The period of Judges demonstrates how the Jubilee system operates during times of apparent chaos. Each cycle of apostasy, oppression, and deliverance follows the underlying temporal rhythm. Foreign invasions don't represent random political events. They arrive on schedule as corrective measures that drive Israel back toward covenant faithfulness. King David's reign coincides with a golden period in the prophetic timeline when Israel reaches its earthly zenith. His military victories and political achievements become possible because the cosmic clock has moved into a favorable phase. But even David's success operates within predetermined limits. His dynasty receives promises that extend far beyond his personal lifetime. The temple's construction during Solomon's reign marks another significant milestone in the prophetic chronology. The building project doesn't simply fulfill David's dream or Solomon's ambition. It represents the cosmic calendar reaching a point where heaven chooses to dwell permanently among humanity. The temple dedication coincides with a Jubilee period dedicated to divine presence. The kingdom's division follows the inexorable logic of the prophetic timeline. Solomon's wisdom and wealth cannot prevent the scheduled fragmentation of his empire. The split between North and South occurs precisely when the cosmic calendar requires political dissolution as preparation for future restoration. Human decisions trigger events, but divine timing determines their occurrence. The exile to Babylon represents the low point in Israel's prophetic timeline, but even this tragedy serves cosmic purposes. The deportation doesn't result from military superiority or political miscalculation. It happens because the Jubilee system has reached a phase requiring purification through separation from the Promised Land. The exile lasts exactly 70 years because that duration fits the cosmic schedule. The return under Cyrus demonstrates how foreign rulers unknowingly serve the prophetic timeline. The Persian king believes he acts from political motives, but his decisions align with predetermined restoration schedule. The Second Temple's construction coincides with a new Jubilee period dedicated to rebuilding divine-human relationship after purification through exile. Throughout this entire chronological framework, Jubilees maintains that human beings retain moral responsibility while operating within predetermined temporal boundaries. People choose their responses to circumstances, but they cannot control when those circumstances arise. The prophetic timeline provides the stage where human drama unfolds according to divine direction. This temporal system offers both comfort and challenge to Jubilee's original readers. They can take encouragement from knowing that their current troubles fit within a larger pattern that leads toward ultimate restoration. But they also face the responsibility of aligning their choices with divine purposes during their assigned period in the cosmic timeline. The prophetic chronology also serves as a warning system for recognizing significant transitions. When events begin matching the patterns described for particular Jubilee periods, readers can prepare for the changes that must follow. Understanding the timeline provides practical guidance for navigating through historical upheavals with faith and wisdom. The entire system points toward a climactic conclusion when the cosmic calendar reaches its final Jubilee periods. All previous history serves as preparation for the ultimate restoration when time itself will be transformed. The prophetic timeline doesn't simply measure duration. It moves creation toward its intended destiny through carefully orchestrated phases of development, testing, judgment, and renewal, the era of ultimate corruption. As the cosmic calendar advances toward its conclusion, Jubilees describes a period when moral decay reaches unprecedented levels. This isn't random historical decline, but a scheduled phase in the divine timeline. The text presents this era as the darkest chapter before dawn, when corruption becomes so complete that divine intervention becomes inevitable. Religious leaders abandon their sacred responsibilities during this climactic period. Priests who should maintain temple purity instead introduce foreign practices. They adopt customs from neighboring nations and blend them with traditional worship. The line between sacred and profane blurs until proper devotion becomes impossible to maintain. Temple worship deteriorates as those charged with its oversight pursue personal gain over divine service. Sacred festivals lose their meaning as leaders manipulate calendar systems for political advantage. The altar receives offerings from unworthy hands, while the faithful find themselves excluded from participation. Institutional religion becomes a tool for oppression rather than a pathway to divine encounter. Social justice crumbles as leaders prioritize wealth accumulation over community welfare. The poor face increasing exploitation, while the wealthy consolidate their power through corruption. Courts favor those who can afford to purchase favorable decisions. The legal system that should protect the innocent instead becomes a weapon used against them. Family structures decay as traditional bonds weaken under cultural pressure. Parents abandon their responsibility to transmit ancestral wisdom to their children. Young people reject the guidance of their elders in favor of foreign customs that promise immediate gratification. The generational chain that preserves covenant identity begins breaking down. International relations become increasingly hostile as nations exceed their allotted boundaries and oppress their neighbors. Empires expand beyond their divine limits. crushing smaller peoples without regard for justice or mercy. Military might becomes the only recognized authority while moral considerations disappear from political calculations. Knowledge itself becomes corrupted as false teachers spread deceptive doctrines that undermine traditional understanding. Wisdom gets replaced by clever arguments that sound reasonable but lead away from truth. Educational systems produce graduates who excel in technical skills while remaining ignorant of moral foundations. The natural world responds to human corruption through increasing instability. Seasons arrive at irregular intervals. Crops fail despite proper agricultural techniques. Wild animals become more aggressive toward human settlements. The environment itself reflects the moral chaos that dominates human society. Divine blessings that previously sustained faithful communities begin withdrawing as corruption spreads. Prayers receive no response. Miracles cease occurring. Prophetic voices fall silent or speak only words of judgment. The sense of divine presence that once comforted the righteous becomes increasingly rare and difficult to maintain. Economic systems collapse under the weight of systemic dishonesty. Trade relationships dissolve when merchants consistently cheat their partners. Currency loses value as leaders debase coins for short-term gain. Markets become unreliable as supply chains break down due to conflict and mistrust. This period of ultimate corruption serves multiple purposes within Jubilees' theological framework. First, it demonstrates the inevitable consequences of accumulated moral failure over previous generations. The crisis doesn't emerge suddenly, but represents the culmination of gradual decay that finally reaches critical mass. Second, the era provides clear contrast for the restoration that must follow. The darkness becomes so complete that divine intervention appears as brilliant light. The corruption becomes so total that divine justice brings welcome relief even to those who might otherwise resist change. Third, this period serves as a testing ground where the truly faithful can demonstrate their commitment under maximum pressure. When maintaining covenant loyalty becomes costly and difficult, those who persist prove their authentic devotion. The corruption separates genuine believers from those who merely followed tradition when it was convenient. The text suggests that this era of ultimate corruption corresponds to the author's own historical moment. Their contemporary readers face exactly these kinds of challenges from corrupt religious leadership, foreign cultural influence, and moral decay. The prophetic description serves as both explanation for current difficulties and assurance that they serve larger divine purposes. Jubilees presents this dark period as temporary despite its intensity. The cosmic calendar ensures that corruption cannot continue indefinitely. Divine patience has limits, and those boundaries appear on heaven's timeline. When the era reaches its predetermined conclusion, the restoration phase must begin regardless of human resistance. The ultimate corruption also creates the conditions necessary for divine intervention. Heaven cannot act until earthly authorities prove their complete inadequacy. The crisis must become severe enough that divine rescue appears as the only viable solution. Partial corruption might inspire reform efforts. Total corruption demands replacement with an entirely new order. Understanding this era helps readers maintain hope during their own dark times. Present troubles fit within a larger pattern that includes both judgment and restoration. The corruption they observe and experience serves cosmic purposes that transcend immediate suffering. Even the darkest period in the prophetic timeline leads toward ultimate triumph of justice and righteousness. Visions of cosmic war. Picture ancient scribes in dimly lit chambers, their hands trembling as they recorded visions of final battle. The Book of Jubilees hints at cosmic war between forces of light and shadow. These weren't the detailed battle scenes we find in later texts. Instead, they emerged as whispered promises of divine justice. The authors painted conflict in broad strokes. Good would rise against evil, heaven would descend to earth, angels would march beside the faithful. Yet these visions carried more weight as hope than as prophecy. When empires crush your people, when foreign gods defile your temples, the dream of cosmic rescue becomes a lifeline. Beyond simple revenge fantasy, these war visions served a deeper purpose. They reminded readers that earthly powers held no final authority. Rome might rule the Mediterranean, Greek culture might flood the cities, but divine justice waited in the wings, patient as mountain stone. The text speaks of princes and powers being overthrown. Nations that exceeded their bounds would face reckoning. Kings who forgot their place would crumble to dust. These weren't random acts of violence, but cosmic course corrections. The universe itself would restore proper order. More than military conquest, this cosmic war represented moral realignment. Truth would triumph over deception. Justice would overcome oppression. The faithful would see their persecutors brought low. Therefore, the present suffering carried meaning. Each injustice accumulated evidence for the final trial. Ancient readers found comfort in these visions during their darkest hours. When Antiochus desecrated the temple, when collaborators sold their heritage for Greek gold, when traditional ways seemed doomed to vanish, the promise of cosmic war whispered, "This too shall pass." Divine armies gather in the heavens. Justice prepares to march. The war imagery also served practical purposes. Communities under pressure needed reasons to maintain their distinct identity. Assimilation offered easier paths. Greek education promised advancement. Roman citizenship brought protection. But cosmic war narratives reminded believers that their struggles mattered on a universal scale. These visions transformed everyday acts of resistance into sacred duties. Keeping kosher became spiritual warfare. Following the proper calendar joined heavenly rhythms. Teaching children Hebrew preserved weapons for the final battle. Small acts of faithfulness accumulated into cosmic significance. The text hints that this war has already begun in heavenly realms. Angels and demons clash above while humans choose sides below. Every moral decision tips the balance. Every act of justice strengthens the forces of light. Every compromise with evil aids the opposition. At first glance, these war visions might seem primitive or violent, yet they carried profound psychological wisdom. When people face overwhelming oppression, they need to believe their resistance matters. The promise of cosmic war provided that belief. Individual suffering connected to universal purpose. The authors understood that hope requires narrative structure. Random tragedy crushes the spirit, but suffering that serves a greater story becomes bearable. Cosmic war gave meaning to present pain by promising future vindication. Judgment on the wicked nations, the book of Jubilees, carries a fierce promise written in divine fire. Nations that crossed their boundaries would face reckoning. This judgment wasn't arbitrary anger, but cosmic law enforcement. Every people received appointed time and territory. Those who exceeded their limits invited destruction. The text names no specific enemies directly. Ancient authors learned caution under imperial rule. Direct criticism brought persecution. Therefore, they spoke in coded language. The nations could mean anyone who oppressed Israel. Readers filled in current enemies with their own understanding. Beyond mere revenge fantasy, these judgment visions reflected sophisticated theology. The authors believed divine justice operated through historical patterns. Empires rose when granted authority. They fell when they overreached. Babylon conquered when heaven permitted. Babylon collapsed when heaven withdrew support. This theological framework helped explain confusing historical events. Why did the wicked prosper? Because their appointed time hadn't ended. Why did the righteous suffer? Because the cosmic clock still ticked toward judgment. Present appearances deceived. Ultimate reality followed different rules. The judgment process begins with accounting. Angels record every deed in heavenly books. Nations accumulate merit and guilt across generations. When the scales tip beyond tolerance, divine intervention activates. Therefore, injustice never goes unnoticed, even when it appears to succeed. More than punishment, this judgment aimed at restoration. Wicked nations faced destruction so righteous peoples could flourish. Oppressive empires crumbled so justice could take root. The process wasn't random violence, but cosmic gardening. Dead wood cleared space for new growth. Ancient readers found deep comfort in these promises. When foreign armies occupied their land, when alien customs invaded their culture, when traditional leaders bent the knee to foreign powers, the promise of national judgment whispered hope. Divine justice delayed wasn't divine justice denied. The text describes judgment falling on specific behaviors. Nations that enslaved God's people faced liberation movements. Powers that defiled sacred spaces met mysterious collapses. Rulers who forgot their mortality discovered sudden weakness. Each judgment fit the crime with poetic precision. These visions also served practical purposes within Jewish communities. They discouraged collaboration with oppressive regimes. Why serve powers destined for destruction? They encouraged patience during persecution. Current suffering would reverse when judgment arrived. They maintained group identity under pressure. The chosen people's oppressors would face divine wrath. The judgment imagery draws from ancient Near Eastern patterns. Divine warriors defeating chaos monsters. Cosmic courts pronouncing verdicts. Universal kings distributing rewards and punishments. These familiar symbols conveyed complex theological ideas through accessible metaphors. At first glance, such judgment visions might seem harsh or vindictive, yet they emerged from communities facing existential threats. When cultural survival hangs in balance, the promise of justice becomes essential hope. Without belief in ultimate accountability, oppression becomes unbearable. The authors understood human psychology. Powerless people need to believe their oppressors will face consequences. Otherwise, injustice appears to define reality. Judgment visions provided cosmic reassurance that moral order would ultimately prevail. Restoration begins. Calendar, temple, covenant. Picture the dawn after a terrible storm. The Book of Jubilees envisions restoration beginning not with trumpet blasts, but with quiet returns to sacred rhythm. The proper calendar would resume its ancient dance. Temple worship would flow pure as mountain springs. Covenant bonds would strengthen like new rope. The authors understood that destruction alone couldn't heal the world. After judgment cleared away corruption, something beautiful must grow in its place. Restoration wouldn't arrive as foreign import, but as recovery of forgotten truth. Heaven would help humans remember what they once knew. The calendar held special significance in this renewal. Throughout the text, timing carries moral weight. The 364-day solar year represented divine perfection. When people followed false calendars, they fell out of step with heaven itself. Therefore, restoration meant returning to celestial rhythm. More than abstract theology, calendar restoration had practical implications. Religious festivals would align with heavenly seasons. Sabbaths would echo cosmic rest. Sacred time would flow synchronized with eternal patterns. Communities would rediscover harmony between earthly life and divine purpose. Temple worship would also return to original purity. No more foreign altars or strange incense. No more compromised priests or corrupted rituals. The sanctuary would again serve as meeting place between heaven and earth. Divine presence would dwell among people who remembered how to worship. The covenant would renew with unprecedented strength. Ancient promises would activate with fresh power. The bond between creator and creation would tighten. Mutual obligations would guide behavior. Divine blessing would flow through channels cleared of obstruction. Beyond institutional restoration, the text hints at deeper renewal. Hearts would soften toward divine instruction. Minds would clear of confusion and deception. Bodies would align with natural rhythms. Whole persons would integration around sacred center. This restoration wouldn't happen overnight. Like spring following winter, renewal would unfold gradually. First signs would appear among faithful remnants. Their example would inspire others. Slowly, the renewal would spread until it encompassed all creation. The authors emphasized human participation in this process. Restoration wasn't passive gift, but collaborative effort. Divine power would enable, but human choice would activate. People must choose calendar over convenience, temple over compromise, covenant over comfort. Communities under pressure found hope in these restoration visions. Their current struggles weren't meaningless suffering, but birth pangs of coming renewal. Every act of faithfulness contributed to the restoration. Every moment of resistance brought the dawn closer. Ancient readers could envision themselves participating in this renewal. They would teach their children proper calendar calculations. They would maintain pure worship despite opposition. They would keep covenant obligations even when others forgot. Their faithfulness would help birth the restoration. The restoration imagery also served psychological needs. People facing cultural destruction need to believe their traditions hold eternal value. The promise that calendar, temple, and covenant would return validated their present struggles to preserve these treasures. At first glance, this restoration might seem narrow or sectarian, yet the authors envisioned benefits flowing beyond their immediate community. When sacred order returned to one people, it would influence all peoples. Divine blessing would spread like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Hints of resurrection and afterlife. The Book of Jubilees speaks softly about life beyond death. Unlike later texts with detailed descriptions, these pages whisper hints and shadows. The authors walked carefully around mysteries too deep for full exploration. Yet careful readers catch glimpses of hope extending past the grave. Ancient Jewish thought was evolving during this period. Traditional views emphasized national destiny over individual survival. The dead slept in Sheol while the living carried forward the covenant. But new questions pressed against old answers. What about righteous individuals who died in persecution? The text offers subtle suggestions rather than explicit doctrine. Righteous ancestors seem to maintain some form of existence. They intercede for their descendants. They observe unfolding history. They participate in cosmic worship. These hints point toward continuing consciousness beyond physical death. More than philosophical speculation, these afterlife glimpses served pastoral needs. Communities facing persecution needed assurance that martyrs hadn't suffered in vain. Parents burying faithful children sought comfort beyond national promises. Individual hope required individual answer. The resurrection imagery remains veiled but present. The dead would awaken when restoration came. Bodies would return to house, returning spirits. The righteous would see vindication they never experienced in life. Justice would extend beyond the boundaries of mortal existence. Ancient readers would have caught these hints with grateful hearts. Their loved ones weren't lost forever. Their own deaths wouldn't end their participation in divine purposes. The covenant bond proved stronger than grave dirt. Divine faithfulness extended through all transitions. The text links afterlife hope to moral accountability. Those who kept faith despite suffering would receive reward. Those who compromised for comfort would face different fate. Individual choices carried weight beyond their immediate consequences. Therefore, present decisions mattered for eternal reasons. These hints also addressed questions about divine justice. Why did the wicked prosper while the righteous suffered? Because final accounting waited beyond death. Present appearances deceived. Ultimate reality would reveal true values. Patient endurance would prove wise investment. The authors balanced hope with humility. They acknowledged mystery surrounding death's domain. Human understanding reached limits when approaching divine secrets. Therefore, they offered comfort without claiming complete knowledge. Faith could rest in partial revelation. Beyond individual consolation, afterlife hope strengthened community resolve. If righteous ancestors continued their concern for descendants, present generations carried greater responsibility. Their choices would affect not only their own fate, but the joy of those who had gone before. The resurrection imagery also served theological purposes. It demonstrated divine power over all created order. If God could raise the dead, no earthly authority held ultimate control. Death itself would yield to divine command. This truth encouraged resistance to oppressive powers. At first glance, these afterlife hints might seem underdeveloped compared to later Christian doctrine, yet they emerged from communities just beginning to grapple with individual eschatology. These early glimpses would eventually flower into fuller understanding. The authors understood that hope requires concrete imagery. Abstract promises of national restoration might comfort communities, but grieving individuals needed personal assurance. The hints of resurrection and afterlife provided that comfort while respecting the mystery of divine purposes. The world made pure imagined creation, holding its breath, waiting for ancient pollution to clear. The Book of Jubilees envisions a world washed clean of corruption. No more idols dotting the landscape. No more false worship ascending like poisonous smoke. No more defilement spreading through sacred spaces. This purification wouldn't happen through violent scrubbing, but through gentle restoration. Like spring rain washing winter's grime from stones, divine presence would cleanse what sin had stained. The earth itself would sigh with relief as proper order returned to its rhythms. The authors understood that moral corruption affected more than human society. Creation itself groaned under the weight of wickedness. When people worshipped false gods, they disrupted cosmic harmony. When they ignored divine law, they introduced chaos into natural order. Therefore, human restoration would heal the world itself. Beyond removing negative elements, this purification would restore positive beauty. Colors would shine brighter when freed from sin's shadow. Seasons would flow with perfect timing when aligned with heaven's calendar. Animals would lose their fear when violence departed from human hearts. The text hints at Eden's qualities returning to ordinary places. Gardens would bloom with supernatural abundance. Fruit would carry flavors that satisfied both body and soul. Waters would run crystal clear, reflecting heaven's light. The whole earth would become temple space where divine presence dwelt comfortably. More than physical transformation, this purification addressed spiritual realities. Truth would replace deception in all conversations. Justice would govern every transaction. Mercy would flow between all relationships. Love would motivate every action. Human society would mirror divine character. Ancient readers found deep comfort in these visions of purity. Their present world seemed polluted beyond repair. Foreign customs contaminated traditional ways. False worship defiled sacred spaces. Compromise infected community leadership. But the promise of purification whispered hope for complete renewal. The purification process would begin with willing hearts. Divine grace would wash away accumulated guilt. Forgiveness would clear paths blocked by past failures. Mercy would heal wounds opened by ancient sins. Individual transformation would ripple outward to affect entire communities. These visions also served practical purposes. They encouraged present faithfulness despite surrounding corruption. Why participate in defilement when purification was coming? They sustained hope during cultural crisis. Current pollution would yield to divine cleansing. They motivated resistance to compromise. Purity was worth preserving until restoration arrived. The authors drew from temple imagery to describe this cosmic cleansing. Just as priests purified sacred vessels, divine power would purify the world. Just as ritual washings removed ceremonial uncleanness, spiritual cleansing would remove moral stains. Just as incense carried prayers to heaven, purified creation would offer acceptable worship. At first glance, such purification visions might seem unrealistic or escapist, yet they addressed real human needs. People living in corrupted environments require hope for fundamental change. Otherwise, evil appears permanent and resistance becomes pointless. The text balances divine action with human cooperation. Purification would come as gift, but people must prepare to receive it. Hearts must open to cleansing grace. Minds must align with purifying truth. Bodies must serve as temples for indwelling holiness. The world made pure wouldn't be foreign paradise imposed from outside, but familiar creation restored to original intention. Every mountain, river, and valley would remain recognizable yet transformed. Home would still be home, but home as it was always meant to be. The final Jubilee, Sabbath of history, picture time itself preparing for rest. The Book of Jubilees envisions history's final chapter, not as violent climax, but as cosmic Sabbath. After 49 ages of labor and struggle, the 50th Jubilee would bring eternal rest. The universe would exhale and settle into divine rhythm. This Sabbath imagery drew from deep wells of ancient wisdom. Just as workers rested on the seventh day, creation itself would enter ultimate rest. Just as fields lay fallow during Sabbath years, history would pause its endless cycle of conflict and renewal. Just as Jubilee years brought liberation from debt, the final Jubilee would free creation from sin's bondage. The authors understood that time carried moral weight. History wasn't random sequence of events, but purposeful movement toward divine goal. Each Jubilee period brought the world closer to ultimate restoration. Each generation added its thread to the eternal tapestry. Therefore, present struggles contributed to cosmic purpose. More than cessation of activity, this final Sabbath represented perfect harmony. Heaven and earth would synchronize their rhythms. Divine will and human choice would align completely. Creation would achieve the unity it had sought since the beginning. Sabbath rest meant fulfilled purpose rather than empty inactivity. The text hints that this Sabbath had been planned from creation's dawn. Divine wisdom had calculated the exact duration of history's labor. Every age served necessary function in the unfolding plan. No period was wasted or accidental. All time moved toward this predetermined rest. Ancient readers found profound comfort in Sabbath imagery. Their present struggles weren't meaningless suffering, but necessary labor before rest. Their generation's pain contributed to approaching peace. They could endure present difficulty by anticipating future Sabbath. The final Jubilee would bring universal liberation. All debts would be forgiven, all slaves would go free, all land would return to original owners, all relationships would reset to divine intention. The Great Restoration would affect every aspect of existence. Beyond individual blessing, this cosmic Sabbath would demonstrate divine faithfulness. God had promised rest for the weary, justice for the oppressed, healing for the broken. The final Jubilee would fulfill every ancient promise with interest compounded across ages. The Sabbath imagery also addressed questions about evil's persistence. Why did wickedness seem so strong? Because the work week of history hadn't ended. Why did justice seem delayed? Because Sabbath rest waited at the appointed time. Present appearances deceived. Divine purposes moved on cosmic schedule. The authors balanced certainty with mystery. They knew Sabbath was coming because God had promised it. They couldn't specify exact timing because divine wisdom exceeded human understanding. Faith could rest in the promise while accepting limits of knowledge. This final Sabbath wouldn't be empty void, but fullness beyond imagination. Every good thing would reach perfect expression. Every beautiful dream would find complete fulfillment. Every broken hope would discover restoration. Sabbath rest meant satisfaction of every holy desire. The text suggests that faithful people would participate in this cosmic Sabbath. They wouldn't merely observe divine rest, but join its eternal rhythm. Their own rest would blend into the universe's Sabbath. Personal peace would merge with cosmic harmony. At first glance, Sabbath imagery might seem passive or static, yet the authors envisioned dynamic rest filled with joyful activity. Like musicians finding perfect harmony, creation would discover its intended song. Activity would continue, but without the strain and discord that marked history's labor. The final Jubilee would validate every act of faithfulness across the ages. Parents who taught their children properly had prepared for Sabbath. Communities that preserved truth despite persecution had protected Sabbath values. Individuals who chose righteousness over convenience had already tasted Sabbath's quality. Why it was left out? The Book of Jubilees knocked on heaven's door but found no room in the canonical inn. Early Jewish leaders studied its pages, weighed its claims, then quietly set it aside. Christian councils examined its theology, debated its merits, then chose different texts for their holy collection. What made this passionate book unwelcome in sacred libraries? The calendar controversy played a crucial role in its exclusion. Jubilees insisted on a 364-day solar year, while mainstream Judaism followed a lunar calendar with periodic adjustments. This wasn't mere academic disagreement, but practical crisis. Communities using different calendars celebrated festivals on different days, creating chaos in religious life. More than timing disputes, the calendar issue revealed deeper tensions about authority. Who decided proper worship schedules? Jubilees claimed angelic revelation, but human leaders needed practical solutions. A text that couldn't coexist with established practice posed problems for community unity. The book's rigid stance on law and purity also created difficulties. Jubilees demanded stricter observance than most communities could maintain. Its harsh penalties for minor infractions seemed extreme. Its absolute positions left little room for the flexibility religious leaders needed to guide diverse populations. Beyond practical concerns, theological issues troubled ancient readers. The text's fascination with angels and heavenly secrets pushed boundaries of acceptable revelation. Its detailed chronologies seemed to limit divine freedom. Its predictive framework appeared to constrain human choice. These features made religious authorities nervous. The sectarian associations didn't help its canonical chances. Groups like the Essenes, who lived apart from mainstream Judaism, treasured Jubilees. This connection marked the text as outsider literature. Communities seeking unity naturally preferred books that built bridges rather than walls. The book's pseudepigraphic nature also raised questions. Ancient readers knew Moses hadn't written these particular words. While pseudepigraphy was common literary practice, canonical texts required higher standards of authenticity. Communities building sacred collections chose books with clearer authorship credentials. Political factors influenced these decisions too. Jubilees contained coded criticism of established powers. Religious leaders operating under imperial oversight preferred texts that caused less controversy. Books that challenged political arrangements endangered entire communities. The text's apocalyptic intensity also created problems. While hope for divine intervention comforted suffering communities, constant expectation of imminent change disrupted normal life. Leaders needed literature that encouraged both faithfulness and practical engagement with present realities. Ancient editors also considered literary quality when selecting canonical texts. Jubilees, despite its passionate message, lacked the poetic beauty of Psalms or the narrative power of Genesis. Its repetitive chronologies and rigid structure appealed to specialized audiences but didn't captivate general readers. The exclusion wasn't necessarily wrong decision. Canonical collections required boundaries to maintain coherence. Including every interesting text would have created unwieldy libraries. The books that survived served their community's needs effectively across centuries, yet the exclusion came at cost. Jubilees preserved important aspects of ancient Jewish thought that disappeared from mainstream tradition. Its calendar system, legal interpretations, and theological insights offered alternative perspectives that enriched understanding of Second Temple period diversity. The decision makers faced impossible choices. Every book excluded meant lost wisdom. Every book included meant increased complexity. They chose stability over innovation, unity over diversity, practical wisdom over speculative insight. These choices shaped religious traditions for millennia. Modern scholars can appreciate what ancient editors sacrificed. Jubilees provides windows into worlds that canonical texts only glimpse. Its passionate advocacy for calendar purity, its detailed angel lore, its predictive history all illuminate aspects of ancient religion that official collections obscure. But it never disappeared like seeds scattered by mountain winds. The Book of Jubilees found soil in unexpected places. Though excluded from most canonical collections, its ideas took root across diverse communities. Ethiopian Christians embraced it as scripture. Qumran sectarians copied it carefully. Early church fathers quoted its wisdom. The book refused to die quietly. Ethiopian Christianity provided Jubilees its most secure haven. Ethiopian Orthodox tradition placed it among the biblical books, giving it authority mainstream Christianity denied. Monastery libraries preserved complete manuscripts when copies elsewhere crumbled to dust. Ethiopian scholars studied its chronologies and cited its legal interpretations across centuries. This Ethiopian preservation proved crucial for modern scholarship. When European academics rediscovered Jubilees in the 19th century, Ethiopian manuscripts provided the only complete text. Without African Christian faithfulness, the book might have vanished entirely from human memory. The Dead Sea Scrolls revealed another preservation story. Qumran caves held multiple Jubilees manuscripts, more than any biblical book except Psalms. This abundance suggests the sectarian community treasured the text highly. They copied it carefully, studied it thoroughly, and based their calendar on its revelations. Early Christian writers also preserved Jubilees fragments through quotations and allusions. Church fathers like Jerome and Epiphanius referenced its chronologies. Byzantine chroniclers borrowed its historical frameworks. These scattered citations kept Jubilees ideas circulating even when complete manuscripts grew scarce. Medieval Jewish scholars occasionally encountered Jubilees through indirect channels. Some chronological traditions traced back to its calculations. Certain legal interpretations echoed its positions. Calendar debates sometimes revived its arguments. The text's influence persisted beneath the surface of official tradition. The book's survival strategies were remarkably diverse. It hid in monastic libraries, sectarian caves, patristic quotations, and folk traditions. Like water finding every crack in stone, its ideas seeped through barriers that blocked its official recognition. Modern archaeological discoveries continue revealing Jubilees' hidden influence. Fragments appear in unexpected places. Manuscript traditions show broader circulation than scholars previously imagined. The text's underground network was more extensive than surface evidence suggested. Beyond mere preservation, some communities actively developed Jubilees traditions. Ethiopian Christianity produced commentary literature explaining its difficult passages. Sectarian groups created related texts expanding its themes. Folk cultures adapted its stories for popular consumption. The book's persistence demonstrated deep human resonance with its core concerns. People across cultures and centuries grappled with similar questions about time, justice, and divine purpose. Jubilees offered one compelling set of answers that spoke to recurring human needs. Its survival also reflected the power of written preservation. Ancient scribes who copied Jubilees manuscripts performed acts of cultural resistance. They chose to preserve minority perspectives against pressure from dominant traditions. Their labor enabled future generations to encounter alternative wisdom. The text's underground existence enriched religious traditions even when they didn't acknowledge its influence. Ideas from Jubilees colored theological development, calendar calculations, and legal interpretations across multiple faith communities. Its hidden presence shaped visible practices. Modern rediscovery of Jubilees has revealed how much religious history relied on limited perspectives. The canonical texts that dominated scholarly attention represented only one stream of ancient thought. Alternative traditions preserved in books like Jubilees offer corrective lenses for historical understanding. The book's survival story encourages appreciation for minority voices in religious traditions. Communities that preserved non-canonical texts performed essential service for human knowledge. Their faithfulness to alternative perspectives enriched collective wisdom across generations. At first glance, Jubilee's exclusion from most canons might seem like historical verdict against its value, yet its persistent survival suggests deeper truth. Some books earn immortality not through official recognition, but through their ability to address enduring human concerns across cultural boundaries. Modern echoes and misuses. The Book of Jubilees awakened in modern times like a sleeper stirring from long dreams. Scholars dusted off Ethiopian manuscripts and discovered ancient wisdom that seemed startlingly relevant. But awakening brought both enlightenment and confusion. The text's powerful ideas attracted serious students and dangerous charlatans alike. 19th century archaeologists were among the first to appreciate Jubilees' historical value. They recognized it as window into Second Temple Judaism, revealing religious diversity that canonical texts had obscured. Academic conferences buzzed with excitement over this recovered treasure. University libraries acquired manuscript copies. Scholarly editions appeared in multiple languages. Biblical chronologists found special fascination in Jubilees' detailed timelines. The book's precise dating of ancient events provided framework for historical reconstruction. Its calendar calculations offered alternative perspectives on biblical chronology. Serious scholars used these insights to better understand ancient Jewish thought about time and history. Yet the text's chronological precision also attracted less scholarly attention. Groups obsessed with prophetic timing seized on Jubilees' mathematical frameworks. They overlaid its ancient calculations onto modern events, creating elaborate predictive schemes. The book became a tool for date setting rather than historical understanding. Modern apocalyptic movements found rich material in Jubilees' end times visions. Its imagery of cosmic war and divine judgment resonated with communities expecting imminent crisis. Some groups adopted its calendar system, believing proper timing would trigger prophetic fulfillment. Others used its predictions to validate their own expectations of approaching catastrophe. The calendar controversy proved especially appealing to sectarian communities. Groups dissatisfied with mainstream religious practice seized on Jubilees' solar calendar as more biblical alternative. They celebrated festivals according to its 364-day system, creating new divisions within religious communities. Calendar purity became mark of spiritual superiority. Anti-establishment movements also found ammunition in Jubilees' critique of corrupt religious leadership. The text's warnings about defiled priesthood and false worship validated their suspicions of institutional authority. They used its language to attack denominational hierarchies and established religious practices. Some nationalist movements appropriated Jubilees' territorial claims and ethnic boundaries. The book's division of Earth among Noah's descendants provided framework for racial theories. Its promises of divine judgment on Gentile nations supported supremacist ideologies. Ancient religious text became modern political weapon. New Age spirituality discovered different values in Jubilees' angelic revelations and heavenly mysteries. Its detailed angel lore appealed to communities seeking alternative spiritual authorities. Its concept of pre-written destiny attracted believers in cosmic consciousness and predetermined life paths. Ancient apocalypticism morphed into contemporary mysticism. Academic scholarship worked to correct these misappropriations by placing Jubilees in proper historical context. Responsible historians emphasized its Second Temple origins and sectarian perspectives. They warned against reading modern concerns into ancient texts. They demonstrated how the book addressed specific historical circumstances rather than contemporary issues. Yet the misuses revealed something important about human psychology. People struggling with modern challenges naturally seek ancient wisdom for guidance. Religious texts that promise divine perspective on human problems will always attract desperate audiences. The key is learning to distinguish serious scholarship from wishful interpretation. The text's modern career also highlighted dangers of literalistic reading. When ancient metaphors become modern blueprints, wisdom becomes folly. When symbolic language becomes practical instruction, poetry becomes propaganda. Jubilees suffered from readers who couldn't distinguish between literary device and literal description. Responsible engagement with Jubilees requires historical sensitivity and interpretive humility. The book offers valuable insights into ancient Jewish thought without providing modern prophetic guidance. Its calendar debates illuminate Second Temple controversies without resolving contemporary timing questions. Its apocalyptic visions reflect ancient hopes without predicting modern events. The text's survival and modern rediscovery demonstrate both human hunger for meaning and human tendency toward misinterpretation. Ancient wisdom can enrich modern understanding when approached with proper respect and careful method, but it becomes dangerous when twisted to serve contemporary agendas it never intended to address. When time is a weapon. The Book of Jubilees closes its ancient pages, but its questions echo through centuries like voices in deep caverns. Why do humans keep trying to box time into neat packages? Why do communities under pressure reach for calendars and chronologies? Why does knowing the future seem so important when the present demands all our attention? The answer lies deeper than curiosity or religious fervor. Time becomes weapon when people feel powerless against overwhelming circumstances. Ancient Jews faced Greek armies and Roman legions. They watched foreign customs flood their cities. They saw traditional ways crumble under imperial pressure. In response, they created detailed maps of history's destination. Beyond mere escape fantasy, these chronological schemes served psychological functions that still operate today. They transformed confusing events into meaningful patterns. They connected individual suffering to cosmic purpose. They promised that present chaos followed divine plan. Most importantly, they assured believers that current arrangements weren't permanent. Modern parallels aren't hard to find. Economic crisis spawns theories about coming collapse. Political upheaval generates predictions of system breakdown. Cultural change triggers warnings about moral decay. Environmental threats produce timetables for planetary disaster. The impulse to weaponize time crosses all boundaries of era, culture, and belief. Yet Jubilees offers more than cautionary tale about human psychology. Its authors possess genuine wisdom about suffering, hope, and community survival. They understood that people need narrative frameworks to process trauma. They recognized that shared time sense creates social bonds. They grasped that future hope enables present endurance. The book's calendar obsession reflected deeper truth about human relationship to cosmic order. Communities that lose connection to natural rhythms drift toward chaos. Societies that abandon traditional timing lose cultural coherence. Individuals who cannot locate themselves in meaningful time flow suffer existential anxiety. Therefore, Jubilee's seemingly rigid chronology actually addressed flexibility needs. By providing fixed framework for history's movement, it enabled adaptive responses to changing circumstances. People who knew where history was going could adjust their tactics while maintaining strategic direction. The text's unsuccessful canonical bid also teaches important lessons about community decision-making. Religious authorities faced impossible choices between competing values. Unity required boundaries. Stability demanded difficult exclusions. Practical needs sometimes overruled theological preferences. Yet the book's underground survival demonstrates that excluded wisdom doesn't simply vanish. Alternative perspectives find channels for preservation. Minority voices discover devoted audiences. Suppressed insights await rediscovery by future generations. The human search for truth is more persistent than any institutional gatekeeping. Modern readers can appreciate Jubilees without accepting its literal claims. The text illuminates ancient thought worlds that canonical literature only glimpses. It reveals psychological strategies that oppressed communities developed for survival. It demonstrates creative theological responses to historical crisis. Perhaps most importantly, Jubilees reminds us that time sense is constructed rather than natural. The ways we divide history, schedule activities, and anticipate futures reflect choices rather than discoveries. These constructions carry power to shape behavior, sustain communities, and enable resistance to oppression. The book didn't predict our world's end, but it shows how desperately some people wanted their world to end. It reveals the crushing weight of imperial oppression, the corrosive effects of cultural assimilation, and the profound human need for justice. In their time weapons, we glimpse the beautiful and terrible depth of human hope under pressure. Understanding Jubilees as historical artifact rather than prophetic blueprint allows us to learn from its wisdom while avoiding its dangers. We can appreciate its psychological insights without adopting its chronological claims. We can admire its community building strategies without embracing its sectarian boundaries. We can honor its passion for justice without accepting its timing predictions. The ancient scribes who created Jubilees have long since returned to dust. Their predicted end times never arrived as imagined. Their calendar controversies have been forgotten by all but specialists. Yet their deeper insights about human nature, community survival, and the relationship between suffering and hope remain as relevant as ever. When time becomes weapon in our own hands, we would do well to remember their example. They wielded chronology in service of justice rather than power, hope rather than fear, community rather than domination. Their legacy suggests that time's true power lies not in predicting the future, but in making sense of the past and enabling meaningful action in the present.